Hi, and welcome to In Search of Insight, Nootropics Depot's monthly podcast. I'm your host, Erica, and sitting next to me is our product specialist, Emil.
Hey, everyone.
And today we have a very special featured guest joining us, Joe Cohen from SelfDecode, who is going to chat with us about his company, his mission. We're going to talk a lot about genetics. We're going to talk a lot about lab testing on humans, not on supplements, in particular blood tests, and what information we can glean from blood tests that can help us understand the right supplements that we need to be taking, the right stacks that we can put together, and his experience with Nootropics Depot supplements. So, Emil, do you want to get a little bit of a background started with blood tests? Why is that relevant when looking at what supplements you should be taking? And how can the average person who doesn't know what to look for in their own blood test start to get more comfortable with this element of checking in with yourself, knowing where your levels are at, and what to even look for in the first place?
Yeah, so blood testing is very important, and I kind of say that in a funny way because I've never gotten my blood tested, actually. We can talk about that a little bit later. But I think in general, if you want to really change specific parameters, like you want to enhance your testosterone levels, or you want to lower your SHBG levels, or you want to increase luteinizing hormone or something like that, having some lab testing there to see what's actually going on and to see what strategies are working is very important. And Joe is doing a lot of lab testing, so we'll talk to you about that because neither of us have done any lab testing, I believe.
No.
Which we should, by the way. I think everyone should at least do some lab tests. But one thing, normally we start our podcast with taking a supplement, so it can run the course of the podcast and it can kick in and we can have some effects from that. So this time we're doing something unique because Joe has a very unique approach of testing certain supplements, and that's through megadosing them. Can you explain a little bit why you like to megadose supplements?
Yeah, and to be clear, I should caveat that people shouldn't try this at home. Like, I'm not recommending other people do it. It's something that I do, and you kind of have to be careful with. You got to make sure what's the safe dosages. You got to understand your body. You got to know, how you react to certain things. Sometimes people are much more sensitive, and sometimes, you really have to. And I think also for me, this is like a work kind of thing as well. Mm-hmm. And it's more important, if this is your job, then that's more important than if, you're just a random person trying to live their life and trying to know what's best for them. I don't think that megadosing is the right approach. But for me, I think that, like, instead of taking something at a low dose for a long period of time and then kind of never being sure if you've really, like, what you felt or not. Sorry, that's actually a delivery of supplements. I get a lot of deliveries. They're all supplements.
I can imagine.
So, yeah. So I didn't want him to keep knocking while we're on here. But in any case, yeah. So I don't. Basically, the short story is: do not do this. Don't try this at home. But for me, I want to make sure, because, like, I used to not megadose things, and then just like I would be taking it for a year, and then I'm like, what is this doing? And then I would just stop taking it because I wasn't even sure what it was doing, and then, like, it would take me years and years and years to figure out if something was working or not when I wasn't doing any megadosing, because you don't really know at most of the time when dosages are given at the regular doses, because they're kind of titrated to a point where you're not supposed to feel anything very significant, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas animal doses, the animals are feeling something significant.
Oh, yeah.
They're giving it at much higher doses. And then for the humans, it's given at much lower doses because of safety reasons, because of a whole bunch of other reasons. You don't want to be taking megadoses every day, right? So the idea is that if you can do it safely, if you know what you're doing, and if this is your occupation, then I think then I support it for myself, essentially. And I think it's been very helpful in really trying to in understanding what was beneficial or not. And sometimes even the megadosing, you can't be sure. And I usually do about 5 megadoses per supplement, because there could be different morning, evening. It could be sleep deprived, sleep sufficient states. There's a lot of different kinds of situations. It could be before exercise, after exercise, in one situation or another. So getting to the megadosing, we decided we're going to do a megadose. I picked the Cognance as my megadosing. So I'm going to take 4 pills. And one interesting thing with Cognance is I had Emil on my podcast, and I said, I'm not really sure if I like the effect. And this is because, honestly, I did not megadose it enough. So I had like maybe 2 megadose experiments, maybe 1, I forgot exactly. But what happened is that I was actually microdosing with LSD before. I don't know if it was, the day before or whatever. But essentially, I didn't notice any effect because of that. Whereas I got into a little bit of a state of like, I was becoming a little more introverted, and I wasn't sure why. And so I said, this is the perfect opportunity to basically, like, that feeling is if I don't have enough 5-HT2A activation. So I said, this is the perfect opportunity to check Cognance. So I took 4 pills, and I did feel all of a sudden much more extroverted.
Interesting.
And so that made me, So if I'm taking it when I'm already extroverted, then it might be hard to tell the difference. Whereas if you're taking it when you're in a more introverted state, you might be able to notice the difference with a reasonable dosage.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, this is kind of how we approach beta testing too, because when we get new ingredients in, we read a lot of the research, and then we have to determine a dosage. And a lot of the dosing is happening in animal models. So we do the conversion, like if it's in a rat, you divide the milligram per kilogram dose by about 6.2, and then we multiply it usually by our body weight, and then we take those doses. Those doses usually are mega doses too. But it gives us a very good idea of like what can something do, and then we kind of go down from there. Sometimes we also start a little bit lower when there's not a lot of data, and then we titrate up and down and try a bunch of different dosage ranges, and then kind of determine what makes the most amount of sense cost-wise too. Because another thing with megadosing is it's great, but it's also a lot more expensive, because if you're taking 4 times the dose, are you getting maybe 1.5, 2 times the benefits, but at 4 times the cost? Or do we do maybe 2 capsules or something, and then you get all of the benefits and the cost isn't crazy high? So we take a lot of that into account. But we do a lot of megadosing too. But as Joe said, we're professionals, so we kind of know what we're doing. We know what the research is telling us. Like sometimes it is unexplored territory, but we make a professional risk assessment there, and we try it, and then we go from there and make sure that everything that comes to you is eventually safe at a good dose, not too high. But I guess now we
Absolutely.
should...
One more
Yeah,
point. We'll do the megadose. One more point is that I do take it on a long-term basis. I try to find the minimum effective dosing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is when I do megadosing, if I'm not too rash and impatient, which I really should not be rash and impatient, but you start with the minimum amount. So you don't start with a megadose if you've never tried that supplement before. And again, I'm not saying this is what other people should do. I'm saying this is what I do, and this is when I know what I'm doing, right? So the idea is that definitely, like, again, not recommending it to other people, but there's a lot of caveats when we talk about megadosing. Now we can... do it.
Now let's go for it.
You Cognance, because you have to explore Cognance a little bit more. Us Tiger Milk, we've taken Tiger Milk for a long time in our stack, but we started at 1 capsule, and it was nice. And then actually for one of the podcasts, we decided, okay, we want a little bit more of an effect, and we took 2 capsules. And then when we took 2 capsules, we realized, hey, there's something much more interesting going on at 2 capsules, and it did give us a deeper insight into what Tiger Milk Mushroom is doing. So
specifically for the respiratory benefits and effects.
And focus. For me, the main thing I noticed with 1 to 2 capsules was the focus, and then we actually started taking 2 capsules every day in our stack. It's not really a megadose, it's higher than normal, but for this experiment, we'll do 4 capsules. Again, this is something that we know is relatively safe. We've taken it long-term at higher dosages. I have taken 2 capsules and then 2 capsules again later in the day. So now we'll see how 4 capsules all at once feels for our megadose.
And by the way, I actually like taking higher doses of Cognance. I find that like I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what my minimum effective dosing is, but I feel like one capsule, 100 milligrams, is probably too little to really notice anything. So I'm still trying to see if maybe I want 200 milligrams. I'm not sure about it yet.
It's the same for me. I really love Cognance, but only at 200 milligrams. So at 100 milligrams, it's really subtle. I get some of the cognitive benefits, longer term cognitive benefits like memory, but I don't necessarily get the unique mood 5-HT2A type of effects. Those start to kick in at 200 milligrams.
What happens if you take like 400?
I have taken 400 too, and the kind of like sensory enhancement effects definitely go up. But I feel like I hit kind of a bit of a diminishing return effect at 300 milligrams. Like from 100 to 200 milligrams, it definitely feels like it is twice as good. From 200 to 300 milligrams, like maybe there's an improvement of an additional 40, 50% or so. But from 300 to 400, there's not enough of a difference to justify that higher dose. But then that's kind of where stacking comes into play too. So a really interesting thing to try out with Cognance. And on the podcast I was on with you, we talked about saffron. And saffron is my favorite thing to stack together with Cognance. So if you take 2 capsules of Cognance and 2 capsules of the saffron recarry, I feel like both the effects of saffron and Cognance become way more pronounced, more so than going higher in dose on saffron or on Cognance. So that seems to be some cool synergy.
Why is it synergistic with saffron?
I think the main reason it's synergistic is because Cognance is acting as a 5-HT2A positive allosteric modulator, so it's making the 5-HT2A receptor more sensitive, and then saffron is acting kind of like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and there's some other effects going on there too, where it's increasing serotonin levels a little bit. And I think the enhanced serotonin levels in combination with the enhanced sensitivity of a 5-HT2A receptor has a very synergistic effect. And with that in mind, you could combine it with other serotonergics too. Like you could
I already do. That yeah. I take a lot of stuff that increase serotonin already. So and by the way, saffron is one of the things I'm still seeing how it fits within my regimen. So yeah.
And that's another one where 1 capsule of saffron, I don't notice a whole lot. And actually, strangely enough, and this is where things get complicated with megadosing or just higher doses of things. There's oftentimes a bell-shaped response curve too, where the effects really change. At higher doses, they can get worse, but sometimes at lower doses, they are worse too. So for me, saffron at the single capsule dose kind of makes me feel a little bit irritated. When I take 2 capsules, it's the complete opposite. I feel focused, I feel in a really good mood, there's no irritation, it has a nice warm, like mood boosting serotonergic effect, but only at 2 capsules, not at 1 capsule.
Interesting.
And I haven't actually gone much higher than that with saffron, but 2 capsules is my sweet spot. So that's another interesting thing, like what Erica mentioned. If you do start taking a supplement and you're just taking it at the recommended dose, that's a good starting point, but maybe try taking it at different points in the day, or maybe try doubling up on the dose and seeing what happens, because maybe you go into saffron thinking, I'm not super into it, it makes me a little bit irritable, and then you take double the dose, and it's one of the best mood boosters. That's the case for me. So when we were beta testing it, I really wasn't impressed, and I was kind of saying, like, I don't know if we should carry saffron. Like, I'm not super impressed by it, but some other people were having good effects. And then I tried double the dose, and then I was fully convinced, and it's been in our stack. Not currently, but we've had it in our stack many times.
Yeah. And this is something that I think is really important that we are discussing on every single podcast episode, which is what does the dose that we take feel like? Our everyday dose, a mega dose, and to encourage you to do some experimentation of your own, because sometimes the supplements that you might be trying for the first time, they're not working with other supplements in your stack, or perhaps it's the dose or it's the time of day, and it's really customizable for what you need and also what you prefer. So our recommendations can help you in terms of finding something new or something that might, adjust mood or cognition or energy levels. At the same time, pay attention to what you're experiencing and trust your own feelings about how the dose is working for you, because at the end of the day, we know ourselves best. And we also know what kinds of things we need to have more of or less of in order to have a balance and feel healthy and do what we want to do in our lives on a daily basis. So something I want to talk about in the beginning, now that we've discussed a little bit about dosages, is your stack, Joe, because I think you're pretty famous for having a very, very large supplement stack, and I'm curious how you experiment or change dosages and add things to your stack and what you're actually taking in your daily stack.
Wow, how much time do we have?
As much time as you need. Yeah, we've got a lot of time.
Yeah. Okay, so the way I figure out what goes in my stack is there's a number of metrics. One is, how I feel based on megadosing. So do I get side effects from something? And, and some things do give me side effects, and you have to sometimes try I megadose it a couple times to see. For example, it turns out that Boswellia, I did a few megadosing experiments with that. The Boswellia phytosome, it actually causes muscle pain for me. And weird. You can't really tell that unless I actually was working out after that. And I don't know exactly why, but it does. It has a lot of benefits for me as well. And so I like it, but it actually caused muscle pain. So interesting. And again, I wouldn't have figured that out with one megadose. And I'm still not 100% sure. I basically have to say, okay, I got to continue to megadose on it, right? So there's things that, like, number one is it can't cause any significant side effects. And I tend to go overboard with certain things and then pull back as I see what the side effects are. Another example was niacin. Gave me a lot of gastrointestinal effects at high dosages, at 1,500 milligrams, whereas at the lower dosages, it was very good. So I still take lower dosages. But yeah, so essentially, like, I'll try things multiple times, and I make sure that I don't get any negative side effects. That's one. And then obviously I want to make sure that I have positive effects from it. So either I have to really feel something positive from it, or there has to be some measurable effect from some kind of lab test. Like, I did this, and this is what happened. And so there's a bunch of examples where I don't necessarily feel anything too significant, but there is something in my labs that if I change it, there's a beneficial effect. So that's number two. And then three, I will look at how many benefits this thing has, and specifically for my predispositions. So genetic predispositions, I look at, basically the SelfDecode software does that automatically for me. So for any given supplement or recommendation, I look at what are all the benefits, and then how does that interact with all my genetic predispositions. So that's another way I do that. And then for everything I do, I end up taking it and see. I also do a lot of research on what are the negative effects for each thing that I'm taking. And those things can also come to light later on. So actually, my regimen is going through one of the biggest changes it's gone through in a long time because of something that I realized. And this was in part through lab testing and in part through symptoms, but mostly through lab testing, actually. So, for example, one of the biggest changes, and I think this is not as appreciated I haven't heard many people talk about it, but there's a fair bit of supplements that are actually have anti-thyroid effects. And if you are somebody already on the lower side of the thyroid spectrum, which I am, and then you add in these anti-thyroid supplements, it can cause some issues. So there's I was putting in a lot of fibers, for example, these fibers, because my LDL cholesterol was high, and I was trying to get it down. It was 250 at one point, and I'm trying to get it down through as many natural means as possible. And fibers is one of the most significant things. So I'm putting in things like psyllium husk and guar gum. There's different types of guar gum, but then there was also glucomannan. Well, it turns out that these are bile acid sequestrants, and that's how they lower cholesterol, but also they lower thyroid hormones. So if you, they'll give cholestyramine to people who have high thyroid hormones, but there's other things that lower thyroid hormones like acetylcarnitine. And so that's another treatment for hyperthyroidism. And if you're already on the lower side of the spectrum, then that could, be significant. And then there's things like higher dose niacin, so above 500 milligrams, will have some thyroid inhibiting effects. And then there's a bunch of other ones like flavonoids, which it's not clear in isolation how much it's going to have an impact, but if you mix a bunch of flavonoids together, there's probably going to be some impact. Now, if you're on the higher side of the thyroid hormone spectrum, then you might end up in the middle, and that's okay. If you're on the lower side and then you end up even lower, that's not so okay. So for me, the way I realized, first of all, with lab testing, I was checking a whole bunch of labs, and what I noticed is that my thyroid markers were getting a little worse, especially my T3. So my T4 and the free T4 weren't changing that much, and the TSH wasn't changing that much, which is, you know, what they're looking at in terms of the gold standard in you know, general care. But the total T3 was actually going down, and my free T3 was also going down a little bit. So so the free T3 was going down, and the total T3. And then what happened was I was trying to optimize a whole bunch of lab markers that just weren't moving, and it wasn't making sense. Why is this not moving when I'm like really throwing everything at this? And the answer turns out to be that thyroid hormones actually help move those markers in the direction that you want. And when I was lowering my thyroid, I was lowering the marker that I wanted to, but it was kind of being balanced against having also lower thyroid hormone levels. And so then I just took thyroid hormones to see, okay, is this the actual thing? And then I actually felt like, you know, a significant difference from it. So that's kind of that's an example of why lab testing makes a big difference, and you know, just how I build my regimen. So I'm right now taking out anything that is a bile acid sequestrant. That includes psyllium husk, acacia fiber, pectin, glucomannan. And again, I was doing these things for a very specific purpose. There's a lot of benefits in the research to fibers, dietary fibers. But again, how does that impact me is the more relevant question. And when you're already low on the thyroid spectrum. So it's these kinds of things that we're building into SelfDecode that we can alert you if you put in your thyroid hormones. You'll be alerted if you type in a certain supplement. Be careful, because this can lower thyroid hormones. And by the way, your thyroid hormones are, you know, on the lower end, let's say, for example. So that's something that I feel like software can really help with that equation. I can go through my supplement list, but I don't know how we want to parse this because it's quite long.
Yeah, we can do that. And just real quick, for those that don't know what SelfDecode is, basically it's a website where you can upload your genetic testing, like if you have genetic testing already from 23andMe, Ancestry.com, like in my case, you upload it onto SelfDecode, and then it's kind of, maybe some of you who are familiar with the genetic analysis stuff already, it's like a much more user-friendly, easy to interpret version of something like Prometheus. So if you upload your genetic data into Prometheus, you basically have to be a scientist to figure out what all of that means. Whereas with SelfDecode, that work is being done for you. So you upload your genetic information, or you can do a genetic test via SelfDecode now too, right?
Correct. And I would have two big differences between Prometheus. I mean, there's a lot more, but essentially, like, what SelfDecode does is polygenic risk scoring. Prometheus looks at individual variants. So this is a big mistake that people make in genetics. They see it as like a lab test and think that, okay, individual SNP variants, I have this SNP, I have that SNP, and that means this, that. It doesn't really work like that in genetics, because within any polygenic trait, which is, you know, most of the traits that people want to know about, there's either thousands or millions of genetic variants that impact that trait. And what Prometheus does is they'll give you individual variants. And that's what all the other companies are doing. They give you individual variants. Some of the companies will do polygenic scores, but like with 5-10 variants or something like that, in which case it's not very significant in terms of it's usually a coin flip whether it actually means anything. Just because if I show you, hey, you have a variant that means this, you'd be like, oh, that's very interesting. But I also didn't tell you the 900,000 other variants that you don't know about. So just showing you one variant out of, you know, it doesn't really mean that much. I mean, it could if it has a very, very big impact. An example of that would be like MTHFR, but the vast majority of these variants, 99.9999%, don't have a very big impact. They have a cumulative impact, and you have to look at many of them. So something like Promethease, they can tell you a couple things here and there for the ones that have very big impact. So they could say, hey, you have this variant that has a very big impact. They're not telling you anything that has polygenic impacts, or they can't really tell you. And if they're doing it, it's not really predictive. The other thing is they don't have recommendations in their system.
Exactly, and that, I think, is the really nice thing about SelfDecode. I wasn't totally aware genetic analysis is not something that is a specialty of mine, so it's really nice hearing that from you. I always did my stuff through Prometheus, and I looked at it, and I always thought, okay, I know a few things now, like I know my monoamine oxidase B and A levels are higher than normal, so I respond well to monoamine oxidase inhibitors. But I know that because I can do all of that research, and I didn't even know that, you want those polygenic things going on too, not just single SNPs.
But even the MAOA and MAOB, what you end up doing is confirmation bias, meaning you already had an idea that your MAOA or MAOB was of a certain level, and you said, oh, I found these SNPs. Whereas if you would have found the opposite, you would have been like, well, I don't know, really. You would have just ignored it, right? The idea is that there's literally, 30,000, 50,000 SNPs within a gene. They're going to pick, a certain number of them. Sometimes it could be right. Sometimes it could be wrong. You're not really doing a real analysis on all of the SNPs that are impacting these genes.
Absolutely. And that's, of course, confirmation bias is always a really important thing. For me, with the monoamine oxidase thing at the time, I had never even taken a selective monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and it came up on my Prometheus, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what would happen if I took a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And then I had big effects with it. And then that's when my confirmation bias kicked in, because now I can look at that and go, yeah, well, my monoamine oxidase levels might be higher, but it is a lot more complex. And you basically need a degree in genetics to figure it all out yourself, because you have to do lots and lots of research looking at all of these SNPs and what they're correlated with. And I think
but even if you have a degree in genetics, it actually won't help. That was the mistake I made in SelfDecode version 1. I hired a PhD in genetics, and he actually didn't know how to do legitimate polygenic risk scoring. So he's just adding up certain SNPs, and it turns out that you need a very specific degree in population genetics, and you have to have a team that does it, because you also need AI and machine learning. You need a lot of things. So it's one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they assume that, like, oh, you've got this SNP, this means this, it means that. That's what all these companies are built of. Right? They have SNPs and say, well, you have this SNP, you do this. If you have that SNP, you do that. And then, but it turns out that all that is nonsense.
Okay. That's really interesting. And I've been looking around my SelfDecode profile now and looking at all of the different health markers and health reports and different supplement recommendations. And of course, this is also a little bit confirmation bias, but I see certain things. Like for me, for pain, one of the things that has helped the most for acute pain is our supercritical myrrh extract. And I was looking through the pain section actually this morning on my SelfDecode profile, and one of the recommendations was myrrh. So myrrh works really well for me. And I saw it on SelfDecode. And I see a lot of supplements on SelfDecode on the recommendations that I'm already taking that I've kind of started taking because of a lot of beta testing and some higher and lower dose experiments and some long-term dose experiments to kind of get a personal feel for these supplements. And I've settled on a lot of things that are actually showing up in my SelfDecode profile now. So I think that's really interesting, because basically it took me 10 years to get to where I am now with the supplements I like and the stacks I like. And then I upload some genetic data onto SelfDecode, and within an hour, I can have basically all of those recommendations that took me years to get towards. And of course, there's a lot of recommendations, and you would still have to beta test and see how they work for you. But I think it's interesting that there are definitely genetic markers there that can then help you choose supplements. And then especially when you link it up with lab testing, because how does that work on SelfDecode? Like if I were to upload some lab testing of myself.
So I'll explain how it currently works and where we're going with it. And where we're going, how it works now, I would say that it's going to, especially people who don't know what they're doing, it's going to help give them recommendations and give them ideas about what to try out, right? That's kind of how, meaning it's not like, hey, we tell you this and this is definitely going to work for you. It's just like, it's a good place because we have a database of clinical trials. We have 400 of your genetic risks, and it basically matches those up and says, hey, look, you have this thing that has clinical trials for these things and you have genetic risk for it, which is a good place to start, just even based on the clinical trial data of, what's going on there. And then we also have, if you upload lab tests, it'll show you the lab tests that are not in the optimal range, and that it'll say, hey, this thing also can help improve that lab test. So that's, and so it'll get more accurate if you upload lab tests. So it gives you a set of recommendations, and you can filter them in different ways, and then it'll also make it more accurate with lab tests. Where we're going, and this is what the next few updates are going to be happening over the next few months, is to make it a lot smarter. In which case, once all these updates happen, then I think it could actually overtake even like, years of what it took you or I to figure out. And so what it's going to do is, number one is, so one of the big mistakes people make with genetics is you never want to say that I have this SNP and then therefore I should do this thing, right? And again, even something like MTHFR might be an exception. It's like, I have this SNP, let me just take a little bit more methylfolate to make sure I have enough, and some riboflavin, right? Because riboflavin is a cofactor for that. But even that is like really just making sure you have the minimum RDA. They did the only real clinical trial was when people were taking the RDA of riboflavin. So really there's no like clinical evidence for you have this SNP, then you got to take this supplement. And but it's one thing. I think MTHFR is, you can have a reasonable theory, and for me, I'd be like, okay, I got this SNP, I'm just going to take methylfolate and forget about it, right? Especially if I understand my biochemistry and things like that. With other SNPs, you cannot do that. And that's what other companies are doing that claim to have personalized stuff. They say, hey, you got this SNP, you got to do this. Do run from these companies, because it's very, very, it's a very poor way of doing it. So what you have to, because the body is so complex, what you have to actually do is, what are the available clinical trials or, good quality evidence for X on how, what the certain recommendation works on a certain condition or symptom that you're trying to improve, right? So that's how the recommendations database is structured. So we have a couple things that we're looking at. Number one is, what are you concerned about? So what you're concerned about is the most important thing for you, right? So if you say, like, I want to improve cognitive function, I care more about that than longevity. I want to improve mood. I want to, like, because let's say, okay, I've got poor mood, or I want to improve this is my most important thing. So what are you most interested in? And so let's say you pick 5 things, and the new system is basically going to allow you to select, okay, you can select a few things now, but it's going to get more intelligent. So you select, here's the things that I'm interested in. Here's all the symptoms or conditions. And one layer of intelligence is that software can do that humans can't do, is you can say, hey, well, there's a clinical trial on this thing that actually help with these 4 of these 5 areas that you want to improve. Would you rather take that than something that only has a clinical trial in one of the areas? Of course, right? So that's one layer of how to make intelligent recommendations. Layer number 2 is to get a little smarter and say, okay, here's the things that you care about, and we're going to find the most things that are going to improve the most areas as possible. You say, okay, we now know your genetic predispositions for a whole host of things that you don't understand fully, right? So some things you might know, for example, your mood, but you're not going to know certain long-term things. So we could tell you is, hey, you've got genetic predispositions for XYZ. These have impacts of, ABC, right? Because cardiovascular disease is going to be more important than, having whatever, something more minor. And so we can say, okay, this thing not only helps with these areas that you are interested in, it also actually helps with these genetic predispositions, and you can see all the genetic predispositions that it helps with. So that's another layer of how to know what to take. Then the third layer is to say, and I would say, by the way, for the first layer, I guess there's a few things. Number one is, what are your diagnosed conditions? What are the symptoms that you have? And what are the conditions that you care about? Those are three different things, but they're all kind of in the same category of like, I want to know the clinical trials of, what is the thing that can have the most effect on all these areas that I care about. So then we go to number 3, which is lab tests. So that is something, again, that you can't really, you kind of need a software for it, because you can upload 100 lab tests, and you can say, okay, tell me also what works for my lab test, because that actually is what is in my body that I'm not able to see. Like, you're not able to see what level your homocysteine is, your LDL cholesterol is, or any kind of your lipoprotein A. You could feel amazing, right? And there's people that feel amazing that get heart attack at the age of 60, or that they can have other problems. So it's not only how you feel. And so you want to see, okay, so your lab tests are number 3. You want to make sure that your recommendations take that into account. And then number 4 is, if you have certain genetic markers, they can prioritize if something comes in, like in terms of the prioritization of the recommendations. It shouldn't tell you if you take something or not, but it can help prioritize. So it could say that, like, hey, you know what, methylfolate actually helps with mood, and you have a genetic predisposition for low mood, and then maybe you said you care about mood. I would be an example of, if I would say, okay, I care about mood, I actually have a low predisposition for lower mood, and then I also have this MTHFR variant, then that means that this is going to come up as higher priority. So the MTHFR is just an example. You could have SNPs and BDNF, MAOA, whatever. So it can help improve the priority, and that's the and then we also include some impact and evidence for meaning, like, something that is going to have a higher impact should also come up higher than something that's going to have a lower impact. So that that requires software to come up with that. We don't do all of that exactly right now. What we do is we will tell you. I mean, we're looking at your genetics and your lab tests, and we're prioritizing recommendations there. And we also use some SNP information, but it's going to get a lot smarter. And I would say the last one that I forgot is also your lifestyle risk. So you're able to fill out questionnaires right now that will tell you what your lifestyle risk is for different things. And this is based on the research, published research, of if you do this, then your risk is either higher or lower. That could also take into account, like, if you have a high lifestyle risk for whatever reason or another, that could say, okay, you've got this higher lifestyle risk that maybe didn't come up with genetics, maybe didn't come up with a lab, especially something psychological, but you have this higher risk for whatever reason, right? Either your parents had it, right? Or, some childhood traumatic event, or there could be any number of things. But the idea is that isn't really captured by lab tests or genetic risks. And so it's getting a holistic picture of all of these things is what you need. And I would say one more element is looking at the downsides of each of these things. So everything that we take has a downside. Everything that we do has a downside. No question about it.
Like
even the healthiest things that we do.
Niacin or your fiber, which I wouldn't expect.
Everything.
Fiber could lower your thyroid hormones.
Yeah, but not only that. No, but everything has even zinc, magnesium, you name it. So there's these Mendelian randomization studies that are coming out quite significantly that are basically showing you if you have a higher level of zinc in the blood, genetically speaking, so it's just looking at, like, they put together a bunch of SNPs, so you have a higher level of zinc in the blood. What does that mean for your predisposition? So they're telling you, like, hey, you're higher risk for this, you're lower risk for that, and I've been doing, I've been looking, me and the team have been gathering up all this research to put in the system, and it's amazing because everything that you have has, like, ups and downs. There's no way, like, no matter what it is, fish oil, everything, you'll see, like, a Mendelian randomization study. You have more of this in your blood, higher risk for colorectal cancer, whatever, right? And they're not able to pick these things up without these studies because there's too many variables at play. So the idea is that we can look at your genetic risks and then tell you and say, hey, you want to be careful about this because you have a genetic risk for this thing, and guess what? This mineral actually increases your risk for this, right? So it's all about optimizing your biology for what you have rather than, oh, my friend takes this and that's why I'm going to be taking this, right? Like, or even better, I'm going to be taking this supplement because I have one SNP without any other information attached to it. Some random SNP out of 100 million SNPs, it comes up as this. This is why I'm going to take it. So that's the worst of it all, right? But the idea is that you can hear that how complex the equation is, and right now we use a lot of these elements, but I think when we're using all of them, again, this is like we're rolling this out over the next 3 months. So when we use all this can get actually smarter than, because it's including a lot more information than you can realize yourself, right? You don't know all the Mendelian randomization studies or all the risks of everything that you're taking. All the interactions, all the risks. You don't know all the, your genetic predispositions, all your lab tests, all your lifestyle risks. There's so much information that we're excluding that is out there. We're just not including that in what we're doing. And I was an example too. Like, I was including so much information on everything in my regimen, but I was still excluding things that I just, again, we could have picked up with software.
Yeah, that's super interesting because, a lot of us don't have the bandwidth to study all of this stuff all the time and to keep track of everything. And having some software there is very interesting, especially with the age of artificial intelligence now. I think if you considered doing this 10 years ago, probably none of this would have been possible. It's improving technologies which is making this possible. And it's interesting to see that aiding our supplement choices, our general health, and this probably eventually, these are big data sets you have at a certain point too. Of course, I don't think any of this data is being shared, but in terms of doing scientific studies, it's really big cross sections of a lot of people with a lot of variables and things like that. You can go, okay, a lot of people with lower thyroid hormone levels, they're also taking these kind of supplements, they're eating this type of food, they have these type of lab tests and genetic reports and seeing trend lines there. I think that's really going to help enhance our knowledge of human health into the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing to keep in mind also while we're all listening to this really in-depth conversation is some of us don't have a science background. Some of us don't have a background in healthcare or in labs or really anything related to this conversation, but we're interested in supplements. We take supplements. We want to be taking things that will actually benefit us. Getting recommendations that take into account your lifestyle and your lab tests and your genetics, that makes the most sense, especially because when you're just starting out with supplements, sure, you're going to take magnesium, vitamin D, these basics, but when you get into the more specific niche products, especially things that, Nootropics Depot carries, for example, it can be hard to know, is this going to help me long term? What exactly is it covering? And SelfDecode is doing that work for you. So I think it can help to demystify a lot of that complexity as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Exactly. So I'll go through, I'll first go through like my notes on a certain supplement, just so people see what it's doing. And I'll try to read it out. So if people are not looking at the video, they could see what's going on. So I first have
before we get into this, I think it is important to note, for those who don't know, this is probably one of the largest supplement stacks I've ever seen. So get ready for an interesting journey. I think how many supplements are in here? 150?
It's about 150, yeah.
Yeah. So compare that to, I think we are taking about 15 supplements. So we're seeing a factor 10 enhancement. And I'm very curious. I've looked through this myself, but I'm very curious to hear kind of some of your explanations, how you got to some of these certain supplements and combinations, and with SelfDecode helping you there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, by the way that I do my supplements, and this is kind of like, I always ask myself, how do I have software do it for not only me, but for other people? Because I'm spending tons of time, and I have a research team. We're like putting together all this information, and I'm just like, okay, well, even for me, this is like a part-time job just doing this. And I'm like, how do we just automatically kind of integrate this so that people don't have to think about it, and it's automatically integrated into the system? So whenever I start doing something, it's like, okay, how do I decide whether a supplement I take a supplement or not. And again, it's based on that method I was telling you about. It's really a whole bunch of things: lab tests, genetic predispositions, what symptoms, conditions, or things do I care about? What are my interests? Do I want to improve longevity? What are my lifestyle risks? I kind of like taken all this to account. What are maybe specific genes or whatever. So I'll take everything into account with different weights, and that's how I build my own regimen. Now, so what I do is I have different categories of, like, you'll see like mood. There's different categories of things that I care most, like that I want to improve, right? And in each category, there's something that, like, there's a main reason I'm taking something. You have to have like a main reason. You can't just be like, okay, I'm taking this for 100 million reasons. You can do that, but you should still have a main reason. Like, I'm taking this for a main reason. So why am I taking methylfolate? One of the things I notice is it improves my mood. That's like one of the main things that I'm taking it for, right? And same for 5-HTP, same for lithium, right? So these are all in mood. So I have these kind of broader categories of what is the main thing I'm trying to improve here. And so my categories include mood, energy production, cognitive function, cardiovascular health, because that's the biggest killer in my family. Again, lifestyle risk we're talking about. And there's certain genetic risks there as well, and also certain labs. So again, it's more of a prevention thing. It's not like, hey, I'll notice something right now. So cardiovascular disease prevention, kidney disease prevention, actually. So certain labs come up as not in the optimal range for kidney health, and so that's one of the things I want to prevent long term. There's gut health. This is something I've dealt with in the past. Anti-aging and longevity. I want to have better lifespan, better health span. Immunity, I want to get sick less often, not suffer as much when I do get sick. And then there's certain hormones that I want to improve. Could be thyroid hormones, testosterone. Then I have muscle performance, bone health, and basically those are some of the main ones. Okay, so now let's go to something like for now, what I realized is if I take care of my thyroid hormones, that can actually have the biggest impact on my health overall, because it actually changes a lot of different things. So, for example, I was talking about cholesterol, LDL. Thyroid hormones actually bring down these lipoproteins quite significantly, up to 70%. It also brings down lipoprotein A, which I had high levels of. Again, so these are labs. I'm looking at labs. It actually increases MTHFR enzyme. So it actually improves methylation. Exactly. Cool. And so I was wondering, why is my homocysteine not going down, even though I'm like really throwing the whole kitchen sink at it with like trimethylglycine, bunch of methyl supplements, and it was still at 11. And I was like, and the reason is because even though I was improving, just throwing a lot of methyl stuff at it, my thyroid hormones were actually also going down because I was taking higher levels of niacin, trying to also decrease my cholesterol, and also higher levels of acetylcarnitine. So you also see actually mood. So one of the things that you notice if you have higher levels of thyroid hormones is better mood. It actually increases the 5-HT2A receptor sensitivity, interesting enough, right? Yeah. And so it could go well with Cognance. And then glucose tolerance, immunity. In some ways, so I was throwing a lot of things towards immunity, and I write down every time I get sick. And so I was sick. I was sick 4 times in the past year, and I said, okay, based on everything that I'm doing, something's not right there, right? Meaning like, okay, maybe it's an average for normal people. Something's not right. And thyroid hormones actually boost my immune system more than anything else. That's kind of where my weakness is. And so, and that's a known thing. Like, it increases natural killer cells, B cells, T cells, dendritic cells, monocytes, macrophages. Like, thyroid hormones are actually quite significant for the immune system. And so what I'm looking at is all different kinds of, it also lowers, it improves kidney health, improves REM sleep, by the way. One of the things that I was lower in was REM sleep. Was trying to figure out why. So it could improve CRP, homocysteine.
So we hear this a lot, actually, that people have issues with sleep, and REM sleep specifically might just be a thyroid thing.
Could be, right? I mean, the thing is that the body's so complex. You have to look at all different kinds of lab markers that you're having. And again, for most people, this is going to be over their head. So you kind of need software and preferably some professional help, but definitely software to help. The other thing is I was noticing my DHEA levels in the blood were lower, right? And I test this somewhat frequently. I was like, why is it lower? And so I was taking like 50 milligrams pregnenolone, 25 milligrams DHEA, and it was still not like that. It was like average or normal. I was like, okay, something's, not quite right there, right? So actually, it's lower in hypothyroidism. My pancreatic amylase was a little higher. So if like, I'm not going to go through all these things. Oh, also like LPPLA2 is higher in hypothyroidism, and that was also a little higher. So when you go through a bunch of different things, also I was in the past was having muscle pain. Some of it was from berberine, which I took out, but still, like I'm kind of a little sensitive to it. If I kind of push too hard, I could get muscle pain. Well, it turns out that people who have hypothyroidism are much more likely to have myalgia or some kind of muscle pain, and affects almost 80% of people with hypothyroidism. So again, in the clinical definition, I actually was not hypothyroid. My TSH was normal. My T4 was normal. T3 was just like on the lower end, and free T3 would have been normal. So there's something, but if you look at everything together, if when I take thyroid hormones or if my thyroid hormones are higher, that puts all my labs in the right direction. Also phosphorus, again, like there's a lot of things that I could be going through, but you kind of have to just so I'm looking at like this in 20 different directions, and this is very complex to do this for normal people who really don't take lab tests every week or two and don't understand like what serotonin 2A is, don't understand what all these markers are. It's a very complex system. So the point is that what's clear for me is, and this is the last symptom, is that my wound healing was lower. So wound healing, like if I would lift heavy weights, I would have pain for longer than I should have, right? And one thing I noticed is when I took the thyroid hormones, that went away right away. Like the wound healing just went boom through the roof.
Interesting.
So now my next move was, okay, so I don't want to take thyroid hormones because actually the TRH, TSH have benefits on their own. Those are beneficial in their own right, besides just thyroid hormones, because there's kind of just like a lot of benefits to this whole cascade if you have it done naturally. So thyroid hormones should be like a last move. And by the way, I've kind of known that I've been hypothyroid for some time on that spectrum, but it got better at a certain point, and then because of certain supplements I was taking, it got worse. And I guess, would you like to see like my tests over time just so you can see what I'm talking about? Or
yeah, I'm curious about your tests and kind of the main strategies you've taken so far to optimize your thyroid hormone, because what you're explaining actually sounds kind of similar to me. I have a lot of muscle pains, and sometimes when I exercise a lot, I have issues with recovery, and I know that low thyroid hypothyroidism runs in my family, so that could potentially be something I need to check via a lab test.
And I suspect a lot of people are kind of, we know like 10% of people are actually like hypothyroid. And then there's a lot of people that are on the border that I think would do better by having more thyroid hormones, but you can't call them deficient. And I would be a case of that. There's no doctor in their right mind that would ever say that I'm low on thyroid hormones. Like, hey, you're hypothyroid. They wouldn't even call me subclinical hypothyroid. It would just, but I know that if I have higher levels, I do better in, with all my labs, with, immunity, wound healing, just everything, right? So, and so this is my TSH from the year 2012, okay? And you could see that it changes quite significantly, by the way, right? You could see it's like, it's going from 1.27 here in 2015, and, there's a slow state. In this case, I was sick, so I don't know how relevant that is. And you could see I took it again in improve this as well. So I don't know how much of what was, for what. But then you could see that I'm going up now, right? And then this is where I was sick again. This is again, so I was sick twice in that year, and having to take a blood test 4 times a year. I had having to take blood tests 2 times, and so this is when I'm normal again. So I took it. This is recently. So I took one yesterday. I took one 9 days ago, and you could see that my. Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is that's what I'm saying is like.
So you do a lot of lab testing then. Okay.
Well, I'm actually now trying to do every week, or every other week.
Or?
So, I mean, I'm trying. So you could see I take gaps or whatever. Like sometimes it's not so relevant. Sometimes I take it twice a week. Basically, it's like I try to take it as often as I can now. And this is more of a recent thing because you could see like in the past year I've taken more lab tests than I've done in the past, or equal than I've done, for 10 years before that. So it's more of a recent thing, and it's because I see the value in the lab tests. I want, and there's just like I want to see that if I'm taking something that it's that I'm having an effect in such and such way, right? So you could see but either way, just to be clear, a doctor will never the lower your TSH generally means the higher your thyroid hormone levels are. A doctor will never mention anything if you're below 5. So even at this level, no doctor would mention anything. No like conventional doctor would mention anything. Whereas if you look at the lowest mortality rates, that is generally between 1.2 to 2.5. We made it a little higher because TSH actually causally it improves lifespan. So we wanted it to be a little higher. So we put it as 1.5 to 2.5 as the optimal range. But the actual normal range is 0.4 to about 5. It ranges in each laboratory. But now let's look at my free T4 because that's something that doctors will also look at. You could see that generally normal, low free T4 in 2013, 2015, right? I'm not sure exactly why, but it's interesting that I have this data, and and then you could see I normalized it here. And then this is me trying to increase my thyroid hormone levels, and 1.57 is the highest that it's ever been. So my results are actually, meaning my lab tests are having an impact on what I'm doing is having an impact on my lab tests. Meaning my free T4 is actually going up. Now, I can't check free T3 in where I am in Israel. I do have it checked in a bunch of different times, but you could see that. So normal free T3, by the way, is 2.3. Doctors will not mention anything if you're if you're above that. However, when you look at mortality studies, basically the higher the better. And you see a big change at about 3. And again, that's pretty significant difference. Like between 2.3 and 3 is like, it's like a 40% increase, right? And that could have a very big impact on health. And so you could see that in these in certain situations, it's like October 9th and this one I was, you can see my free T3 was going down. And this is when I'm talking about that I was hypothyroid, and doctors don't check free T3. So I would have just completely went under the radar by them checking TSH, T4, free T4, which were all normal, as you saw. But you see now me getting my free T3 more normal again, right? So this is the beauty of lab testing. It doesn't matter what you think or how you feel, or you just look at the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard Emil say similar things about just when it comes to standardizing supplements and conversations about, people who want to take a whole botanical versus an extract. But when it comes to having beneficial effects from a supplement, being able to measure what's actually in the supplement and how much you're taking on a daily basis, and control for all of that is essential. Otherwise, you really have no basis
100%.
To say that something is going to benefit you. And it's a similar case to what you're talking about here.
So basically, we're on two different sides of the coin here. We are doing the first step where we are getting the botanical supplements or the isolated ingredients to a high quality,
extremely
high
important, extremely,
and high consistency standard, because that's important. If you're looking at, Because you can look at this research and you can see, okay, berberine, that can be really helpful for controlling blood glucose levels. But then you buy berberine from a company and there's no berberine in the capsule. We've literally seen this a few times where we will buy like a Panax ginseng product and we will do HPTLC species testing on it. And there's no Panax ginseng in there at all. It's just rice flour, 100% rice flour. So if you're looking at this research and you're looking at SelfDecode and you're getting these recommendations of you should take some Panax ginseng, that might help with these things and these different blood tests, these different genetic markers, and then you're taking it for a long time and then you redo your blood tests and you kind of, how am I feeling on a personal level? And you realize there's no change. Maybe it's not because Panax ginseng doesn't help. It's maybe because you just weren't taking Panax ginseng at all. You were just taking rice flour.
And that could be one reason why something isn't effective for you, but it could also be something else, like what Joe was saying about the thyroid. It could also be that the supplements that you're taking, even if they are going to work for you, they might not actually target the issue that's causing, mood issues, tiredness, whatever you may have. Because the issue is bigger and it's more complex than a single supplement could actually target. So it goes both ways.
And that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we're putting out scientifically based, well extracted, highly standardized, pure products. And then Joe and SelfDecode and individuals who are taking supplements, then it's on you to utilize those supplements properly. And I love seeing this dynamic here where we can deliver high quality ingredients and Joe can take those ingredients and work his science on that.
One of my favorites are actually the Panax ginseng leaf that you guys sell, 40% ginsenosides. So I think you guys are doing a great job with, I'm a huge fan of Nootropics Depot, especially in the past year or two. You guys have like really put out a lot of innovative products that you can't really get elsewhere in the market. So kudos to you guys. But in any case, so back to my T3 here, where you could see that like this kind of fluctuates over time. And this February 2023, you could see that I'm at 64 here. And which again is technically considered normal, but it's definitely not optimal. And you could see that me basically getting it back into normal based on the lab tests, right? I'm seeing like, hey, this is 64. What the hell's going on? And then you could see me like, now some of the herbal stuff didn't work as well as I wanted on the T3, to be honest. But you could still see that at least I got into an optimal range of 90, still on the lower end, right? There's some people that are at 200. That's the higher end of normal. So there's quite a large variation of what normal is. My free T3 is probably like I really do want to check that because that's I'd say that's the most important one, especially when you're looking at overall mortality. So that I have to wait till I can get to a lab that does that. But essentially, you could see that it was at least going in the right direction. And again, none of this I could have known just by looking, just by, how do I feel exactly, right? Because I'm also taking a lot of things that boost my energy levels, and like it's very hard to figure things out exactly. But through the combination of certain symptoms I had, through the combination of my labs, and basically, and also in a lot of things, it's also based on my genetic predispositions. I'm able to figure out what is the thing that I need to take. Now, let me get back to, I want to, now that you understand like what I'm doing when I actually look at something, it's not like pretty random. I'm very data driven when it comes to a lot of these things.
Very scientific.
I'm actually just going to share the whole screen here. I want to show you something that I do that this is very important, actually. So every time I do a lab test, I put in my whole regimen that I was doing at that point. So I can always come back and be like, why was my lab test? I only started doing this in the past like year. Okay. So, but you can say, I was like, why was my lab test this way? Like, what was I doing then? And then I can look and see, this was my regimen at that point. Right. And I was taking this. So I think that is, that's one thing that I do as well. Let me just share the screen again. Where's this here? Okay, I'm gonna go to I'll go to my regimen here. Okay, so this is okay. So these are I put in this is kind of how I take things. I have a morning shake, an afternoon shake, and a dinner drink, right? And that's kind of like there's supplements that I take in powder form. Mainly those are the things that either taste good or don't taste bad. And then there's a breakfast stack, an afternoon stack, and a dinner stack. So in my morning shake, there's a whole bunch of things, but the base is nutritional yeast and hemp protein powder. And the idea there is that I want to get enough protein in the morning to get things going. So the nutritional yeast has some protein, hemp has some protein. Sorry?
And any specific reason for hemp protein over a different protein source?
No. So my afternoon shake has whey protein. And I also put in, I'm going to be putting in collagen protein. So one of the things I was doing was putting in glycine. You could see I say 3 grams of glycine, and I actually colored it red to remove it because actually I wanted to get certain amino acids. Something I realized is like you also need proline and serine and certain other amino acids that you have in collagen that if you're just taking glycine, you might not be getting. So one of the reasons I take glycine is I read a study that if people who take 10 grams of glycine a day, the amount that they get sick went down by like 80%, right? Which is a huge number. I'm like, okay, I'm taking this guy. There's a bunch of other reasons as well, but essentially, but I decided that because collagen has a lot more amino acids, I've been wanting to get more proline as well to supposedly that, you also need proline in addition to glycine in order to create collagen in your system, which is what you want. And that's what actually helps you prevent you from getting sick. It builds the matrix, right? The collagen, the extracellular matrix by collagen. So you want to basically produce a lot of collagen, and it turns out that collagen also lowers lipoprotein A. So what I think is like, hey, if I have higher lipoprotein A, there could be a factor of maybe lower collagen production, and maybe if my immune system is not good, lower collagen production. So that's kind of how I look at things. If we look at, I'm just going to go through let's say my breakfast stack, for example. So there's a B complex, pregnenolone, fish oil, niacin, and by the way, some of these I'm actually taking out. This is a recent thing. I'm taking these out. I take a bunch of
So we're seeing some live editing.
Editing. I'm seeing some. Then I take individual probiotics, because I'm experimenting with one at a time. But essentially, I make sure that I'm getting L. reuteri, B. coagulans, B. longum, L. rhamnosus, L. plantarum, B. satilis, and these are specific species, Clostridia butyricum. So probiotics actually have quite a big impact, and you're not necessarily able to notice that through megadosing or in the short term. It's more through like longer term changes in the microbiota. And a lot of this is to help build tolerance to foods. So we see that there's a massive increase in allergies, celiacs, any kind of food sensitivity. And what I've been able to do is reverse or substantially reduce all of the food sensitivities that I have, actually. I used to be able to only eat like meat, like Jordan Peterson. I'm not kidding. And recently I've been able to reverse it through a whole bunch of supplements, including probiotics, among other things.
That's really cool. Okay, yeah. Well, we will definitely make a significant chapter marking for that, because I think that's something a lot of people would be really interested in.
And we are big fans of probiotics too. We're not taking individual strains, but we do a lot of our own fermentations. So we lacto-ferment a lot of vegetables, which should get some of those lactobacillus bacteria in there. And then we make kombucha, which kombucha is a pretty complex source, I guess, of probiotics if you're making it yourself. Of course, the stuff from the grocery store, oftentimes they make it and then they pasteurize it and then they take the alcohol content out, and then by doing that they destroy all of the probiotics, and then they add a few strains of probiotics back in. But we're making our own just drinking it straight as the fermentation is ending. And that actually, for us, it seems to have, again, our general gastrointestinal system feels better when we're drinking regular homemade kombucha and fermented vegetables. And our mood actually is higher. So I think that's an interesting thing about some of these probiotics, like the rhamnosus one. I know that one can have kind of an anxiolytic effect for some people. So there's some interesting things there in terms of cognitive function and mood too.
And now that we're talking about all this lab testing, I really want to get some lab tests weekly on what the probiotics are in each batch of kombucha and vegetables, although that's not really practical for us at this time.
Not practical. You can do stool. Have you ever done that actually, where you do stool samples to see what your probiotic levels are like? I know that exists these days.
Yeah, you're asking me? Like, I don't know. I've tried. So I've tried to do it a few times, and the last time I tried to do it, the results were just completely garbage. And I don't think it's basically. I have a feeling that it's a little bit like genetics, and in terms of genetics, getting something that's like. You would think like, oh, it's like buying a car. One's going to be a little better than the other. It's either worthless or worth something, right? It's kind of, there's no in the middle when it comes to genetics. It's like completely worthless. And so, and almost all of them are completely worthless. So with microbiome stuff, I feel like it's, again, I tried it recently, and one of the things it showed is like I have 0 L-reuteri in my system, and I'm like megadosing L-reuteri. So, I'm just like,
hey, maybe you're not getting real L-reuteri.
No, but I've taken a lot of different kinds from good brands. Like I've been taking 3 different kinds from 3 different good brands together, and it's like, yeah, you have 0 L-reuteri. Well, I don't. If that's the case, then like, what is the value of this? Like, okay, so if I take L-reuteri, it's still not going to show anything, right? And there were just certain things that it was showing that I'm like, nah, this is not so true. Like a lot of things that I was taking was just saying I have 0 in it, and like, I don't know. So it's a very, but I also know in general, we looked into microbiome in terms of, do we want to do it? And the answer was that there's not a lot of stuff that you can get from it. And to do it right, it's again, it's like the genetics. You really have to have very sophisticated stuff. These companies are like, they're spending a few $1,000s, whatever. They're getting crap. Like we spent literally like $20 million to build out what we've been building.
Oh wow!
If these, and again, to do what these other companies are doing with these genetics, like to build a Promethease would have cost maybe like, I don't know, $50,000. It's quite simple, right? It's not very complex. So it's maybe and some of these other companies would literally take like $10,000. Like you just have a spreadsheet of SNPs, and it's like, okay, just get a PDF download for the spreadsheet, and says, okay, if you have this SNP, you do this. Like it's very, very simple to build. You don't need a good developer. You can get any cheap developer. So that's kind of what is out there. And I feel like there's probably a similar situation in microbiome where there's nothing. There's a few big companies, in the space like Day 2, but I've actually heard from insiders that you I don't see anything like significant that you can get from it. Like you can't actually predict anything significantly. I don't know. You don't know exactly what you can change. There's some things that I'm sure you can get from it, but you got to get the right test, and then also you got to be. It's kind of like you've got this one SNP here. The microbiome. The NIH has invested many billions and billions of dollars into genetics, maybe 100 billion. I don't. You know what I'm saying? Like lots of money globally invested into genetics, whereas microbiome is much less and it's much newer. So I think that could be interesting in like 5-10 years time. Right now, I don't see how I can utilize it.
Interesting. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing
implementable.
Back to your list.
So yeah, so how about this? How about I scroll through this? Because again, just to read everything out is going to take a long time. I could scroll through it. Anything that pops out, you can ask me, hey, why are you taking this?
Let's see. It's quite small, so we will do our best.
Actually, if you can maybe point out, since we had this conversation about thyroid hormones. That's better.
That's better.
Since we had this conversation about thyroid hormones, which in this list are kind of your favorite ones for thyroid hormone support?
Okay, so there's Okay, so I'll take you to this is like my thyroid section. And so one is I take a thyroid glandular that has some thyroid hormones. It's nothing too significant, but I feel like, why not? It does have some effect. It's pretty minor, but, it kind of just has some of the things in the thyroid gland, including some very small amounts, T4, T3. I felt that Google, not the search engine, but Guggul, has some significant... I felt some significant effects from it, and I kind of I like the effects. The results on my lab test weren't as promising though. So the free T4 did go up. That was something that was noticeable. So the free T4 went up, but the T3 went from 85 to 90. It's not clear how significant that is. Maybe I had to have taken it for longer periods of time. I'm not sure, but essentially, I would like to check my free T3 and some other markers, but essentially, just the way I feel, it makes me feel like the animal research shows that it increases thyroid hormones. And the way I feel from it, I like it. It has very unique mechanisms of action that no other supplement has. And so it's kind of interesting. It's one of the only things that actually... if you look at my fasting glucose over the years, it's never been below 93. I've literally taken it 20 times. For some reason, it's not high. My HbA1c is usually around 5.4. It was 5.1 when I was taking the berberine, but it went up to 5.4. So don't have high blood sugar, but the fasting blood sugar for some reason always high. When I introduced Google, it actually went down significantly from 93 to 83. So that was the only change. Wow. Now at this stage, I have to do the test again, see what's going on. Oh, there was one other change. So actually, I take that back. I also took conjugated linolenic acid. So I'm not sure. It could have been from that as well.
Okay. But it sounds interesting. We were chatting about it recently a little bit. So I think this is definitely one the Nootropics Depot is interested in too, because it seems like it has some mood boosting properties, some energy boosting properties, effects on thyroid, blood sugar potentially, all things that we're really into as a company.
Yeah, and so anything that I take, I also look at how it interacts with my genetic predispositions. So I haven't done this for all of them, but you could see what are the clinical trials for Google, and what are the genetic predispositions that it interacts with? So these are the ones we haven't, since it's not as common one, we haven't added it to the lab test yet, but it's going to be, added over time. And in terms of the LDL, there's conflicting studies for that. So that's interesting. Some say it increases, some say it decreases LDL. For mine, not clear. It didn't really increase it, but I would say that probably didn't decrease it either, so not clear. But in any case, let's go down to some of the other supplements. I take Tongkat as well. Tongkat is I take for my food sensitivities. I did notice some big changes in the lab test. I noticed decreased LDL and GGT. So those were some of the significant changes. Yeah. And overall, I noticed that my food sensitivities went down. I can't say 100% it was from Tongkat, but it does have those mechanisms. And so you could see that I put all the reasons why I take something. Thyroid is actually one of them. It increases the deiodinases, which increase the conversion for T4 to T3. Although I didn't see, maybe I have to take it for longer. I recently upped the dosage from 250 milligrams twice a day to 500 milligrams twice a day. So I doubled the dosage, and I'm going to see what kind of effect that has. Oh, now that I think about it, that also could have had an impact on the blood sugar, but probably not. In any case,
lots of variables.
Yeah, that's why I check. I want to keep rechecking every week. And then overall, it's kind of like you take certain things out. I want to see if that blood sugar is even stable at lower levels. And so before I want to make any general conclusions, but what I did notice is my GGT and LDL did go down. Those were reasonably significant. And so that I think is quite significant. I could pull up my lab test, but I'll just continue. Then iodine, I take some kelp to make sure I have enough iodine. Again, you don't want to take too much because that could inhibit thyroid. Yeah. But actually, kelp has some other benefits, like could improve cognition, reaction time, attention. And
yeah, there's some really interesting polysaccharide type compounds in a lot of the seaweeds. We've been doing some research on the seaweeds, and like fucoidan and things like that. They seem quite interesting compounds.
Yeah. Ashwagandha, I was taking Shodan at a certain point, and you guys sell both of these. I'm going to be taking
Shodan.
Yeah. It has a higher percentage of withanolides, which is what increases thyroid hormone. So
very high. Yeah.
I like the way it impacts my mood. I like it supposedly increases thyroid hormones, sleep quality. There's kind of like a lot of benefits to ashwagandha. And you could see here that some of the clinical trials on what it improves and how it interacts with my predispositions. And then the Bacosides, Bacopa, I really like 3 different types of Bacopa for 3 different reasons. So there's the Cognance one for the 5-HT2A receptors. There's the Bacosides. Which
I guess real quick,
yeah.
How are you feeling on the Cognance with the Megadose?
I think pretty good.
I guess we haven't touched on that yet.
Yeah, pretty good. I like it. I mean,
you seem very focused.
Yeah, you seem super locked in. So.
Yeah, you guys are the judge. I also didn't get a lot of sleep last night.
And how are you feeling?
Okay. So, did you notice it kick in at a certain point, like where things really changed, or has it been just more smooth, and now that you're reflecting back you can think, oh yeah, maybe?
No, I noticed it kicked in at a certain point. I'm pretty sure. Okay. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I mean, again, I've megadosed it quite a few times, so I already kind of know the feeling. I like it. So yeah, the Cognance, really good stuff but mainly just for mental stuff. Like, I don't really expect it to do much else. And then for the Bacosides, I mainly take that. Actually, I'm trying to get for thyroid hormones. It's supposedly stimulated thyroid hormones in animals. Again, there's not a lot of good studies in humans for these things, but also just in general improves cognitive function.
Interesting, because I've been taking the 24% Bacoside extract we offer for the last month and a half, and I felt really good on it. So maybe there is something with the thyroid hormone thing going on there.
Could be.
But again, I'm not sure, because I've never done lab testing, but it would be interesting to see that, especially because I have hypothyroidism in my family. So maybe that's one of the reasons I feel really good on it, but you don't really feel that good on it.
No. And I can't give the most relevant example in terms of thyroid, but I did have some thyroid issues like 10 years ago or so.
Where you had hyperthyroid.
I think it was hyperthyroid, and it was causing all kinds of different weird symptoms. And then I had my thyroid levels tested, and they said, oh, it's not normal. Let's see what happens. And a couple months later, it went back to normal. And I didn't change anything at the time. I was in high school, and they just said it should even out over some time. But one thing I can say now is that the Bacopa 24% Bacosides does not work for me. It makes me very tired, very irritable, and it just kind of like crashes my mood at a certain point. So yeah, I think Emil and I must be quite different in terms of our thyroid levels. Probably other things, of course, other things too, which is why we have such a different response. But now I'm very curious about SelfDecode for myself, because I want to know why that might be happening. Maybe that could help me.
So that's a really good point that you brought up. I was saying that a lot of supplements are not good if you're hypothyroid. There's supplements that are not good if you're hyperthyroid. And it could be, like, again, I don't know what your blood tests are. It would be interesting to check, number one, your genetic predisposition. We do have genetic predispositions for hyperthyroidism, but obviously the gold standard is just going to be to check your blood test. So one is just going to see your genetic predisposition, but for something like thyroid, you actually just want to check your blood test, because it's one thing you have a genetic predisposition for something. It's something that you can easily test for and rule in or out. So in your case, if you had that predisposition for hyperthyroidism, I'm assuming it was Graves, or maybe not.
Yeah. Or that was a concern. They said it could be Graves, but it might not be. If it goes back to normal, then you're fine. But these levels would indicate something that could be Graves.
So something that, like, if I saw your lab test over a number of years and you were testing it frequently, you could see like all your, total, TSH, free T4, total T4, total T3, free T3. If we saw those markers, we could get a much clearer understanding of what's going on. And by the way, I wouldn't trust the ranges that you would get in the regular reference ranges. So you could just easily upload them to the lab analyzer and see, hey, maybe I'm on the higher end. And if you take something like Bacopa with high Bacosides, that could stimulate your thyroid even more, right? So that's kind of like the other side of the equation. If you're hyperthyroid, maybe you do not want to take Bacosides or Google or pretty much, a lot of the things that I'm taking here. And so, so I mean, you'd want to be careful about it. And so that's kind of where the value of software comes in. You upload a test and we could then alert you to these things. And as time goes on, we could get smarter and smarter as to, how much to alert you for what. But yeah.
For sure. And I'm lucky because I have Emil and, we're married. So I can ask Emil, why is this happening? I'm feeling really down, or my mood is terrible, or, my stomach starts to hurt, or I get these weird recurring, like over-the-top recurring thoughts when I take this particular supplement. Why do you think that might be happening? And Emil and I can kind of troubleshoot why that might be happening. So I'll take something out of my stack and we discuss it. So Emil is like my, my in-person expert, but not everybody has that access to Emil.
Right.
So having access to information and suggestions, especially that's scientifically backed, is really reliable, and anybody can access that, even if they're not able to chat with Emil about it on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And I used to, rely on a lot, like less lab testing, until I realized, like, wait a second, like you just need those lab tests because you could theorize, and that's what I did. And, hey, well, it could be this, it could be that. Maybe it's, you're responding this way to GABA or that. But you have to get the lab tests and see, like, okay, because if you're a hyperthyroid or your levels are higher, then that would all of a sudden just change all the theories that there's no way that Emil could know that, or anybody, right, without the data, right?
No,
so there's too much information that it's not possible to know without data.
Absolutely. And that's something that can make like beta testing a bit challenging sometimes, because we don't have that data. So there are times where we have different effects, or we experience something different from a supplement, and if we did have that data, it would give us a lot more conclusive information as to why we're feeling what we're feeling. And I think this is a really important podcast for everyone who's watching, to learn about all of the reasons why you should get your blood tested, and you should be, aware of where your levels are at. But it's also really good for us, because I think this is something that we don't really explore so much in our beta testing process, but I do think it's something that would be very worthwhile to do in the future, moving forward, especially as we try out and develop new supplements for Nootropics Depot.
Well, it would be really easy. Like, for example, we're working on a new Tongkat product and a new Cystange product. And it would be super beneficial if we can kind of just wash out. A lot of us take Tongkat Ali or Cystange. If we wash out for a while, get our levels checked, and then take those new formulations and then compare it to the old formulations and see, are we gaining anything, or does it just feel different? Because obviously they're going to feel different, they're more complex, they're different extracts, they're new combinations of things, but is it actually having the intended effect of raising testosterone levels? And that's something, when we released Tongkat Ali, it was actually very community driven too, because we just focused on making the best scientifically backed up Tongkat Ali extract, focusing on higher levels of uricomedone, because that's the main compound that's elevating testosterone levels. And then we just put it out there because we made a really good Tongkat Ali extract. We tried it, we liked the effects, but we never did any blood testing on ourselves. And then a lot of our customers started taking the Tongkat Ali, and they started sharing before and afters, and they were seeing huge increases in testosterone sometimes. Not always, but quite a few people noticed very large increases. So then that kind of gave us some data points to go on and try and optimize things, because we saw, for example, testosterone levels go up significantly, but we saw E2 estradiol levels go down a little bit. So in our new formulations of the Tongkat Ali, we want to figure out ways in which we can mitigate a little bit that estradiol effect, where we can balance that effect with something like horny goat weed, something people have been doing already, and this is suggestions we've been able to give because we've seen other people's lab testing. But to do some internal beta testing and lab testing and uploading it to SelfDecode and seeing what's going on there would give us even more scientific insight into the extracts and products we're putting together.
Yeah, so on the note for Tongkat Ali, you could see my testosterone over time. So in 2012, it was 723. And then you could see as time goes on, it kind of was going down. And I wasn't paying. And then it went to like 461. I'm like, what the fuck? You know, what's happening here? And you could see I brought it to 715 a month later. I don't even. So I didn't document exactly what I did. I think I probably was taking Tongkat Ali. Like when I saw this, I think I was taking Tongkat Ali because I remember taking it around that time. But then I kind of like forgot about a lot of stuff. You see, I went down. And then I got into a health kick where I started exercising more and then also taking a lot of supplements. And you could see that I went from 587 and then to 937, 1,000. And you can see I've been around 1,000. And I went down to 770. This is when I stopped taking the Tongkat Ali. So you could see.
Okay, so that makes a big difference.
Yeah, there wasn't, again, like, nothing 100% sure because I didn't only do one thing. But you could see it was pretty stable for a long time, which is when I was taking Tongkat Ali. And then I stopped, and you could see it's pretty stable now, right? So interesting results there in terms of Tongkat Ali seemed to have increased my testosterone by about 200 points.
Wow.
And the thing is, by the way,
it's quite a bit for a natural supplement.
It is, and I stopped taking Tongkat Ali because I actually wanted to decrease my testosterone because you kind of want it in a certain range, really. Yeah, I mean, like having like higher testosterone can shorten lifespan. There's kind of positives and negatives to testosterone, and you could see like we're building it into the system, so it'll automatically show up for people. But if I just want, like, I have certain notes on this already, and so if I look at, let's see, where's my testosterone notes? You'll see like there's benefits and negatives. Here, testosterone. So I take a couple things. I mean, I take other things for testosterone, but they're not mainly in the testosterone. But you could see things like you see benefits and negatives. So benefits are bone mineral density, it decreases lipoprotein A, lowers fat mass, like a lot of things we kind of know, lowers inflammation, CRP, for certain cancers, gout and type 2 diabetes, potentially, right? And these are Mendelian, MR means Mendelian randomization. And then you see the negatives: shorter lifespan, prostate cancer, baldness, higher blood pressure, higher red blood cells. This could be a positive or negative depending on what your existing level is. And, and then there's a list of negatives, right? And there's a list of positives, which is why it's not clear. Like a lot of times you want to increase your testosterone, decrease it. The reason why I wanted to decrease mine in the end of the day was because of my red blood cells and hemoglobin were actually in the higher end. So if we look at hemoglobin, my genetic predisposition is higher for that already. But where's hemoglobin here? Okay. So you could see like at some points it actually went up to pretty high, 17.4. And then you could see it's on the higher end, right? And this is in certain points it went up higher. And you want it to be in an optimum range, right? You want hemoglobin can deliver oxygen, which is great. And then on the other hand, it could thicken the blood and cause some problems there. So you kind of want it in a balance. And that's why you have to know where you are rather than, everybody should increase testosterone. Now, again, 770, 800, I feel like is a good number, which is, I just didn't need to be at like 1100, right? So you really, and again, I feel like for regular people, it's going to be too hard to figure all this stuff out. You really do need software. And so this is an example, by the way, as I looked up Bacopa, and you could see what are, I have a predisposition for poor executive function, and then it also, all these things have like clinical trials behind them. So I always look up things here and to see how it interacts with my labs. And some of them some of them were actually pretty surprising, like plantarum. Like some of the probiotics have way more. So you could see this is how it's interacting with my labs, just so people see how this looks currently, right? So there's homocysteine. It could help lower homocysteine, improves mood. This is one of the things I care most about. That's why it's over here. And then my ApoB levels are higher. My homocysteine, like these are genetic predispositions, by the way. So these are actually true for me in terms of ApoB and homocysteine, and acne as well. And you could see that it counteracts these genetic predispositions. And then these are things that I don't have genetic predispositions for, but but it could still help, right? So the higher the VO2 max, the better, even though I'm just have an average predisposition for it. And so there's quite a lot of benefits for something like L-plantarum, which I never realized. There's a lot of examples of things I never realized, like how many good clinical trials or just how many clinical trials were behind certain things until this feature came along. Same with saffron, actually. Like there's more clinical trials than I thought about for saffron. So that's one of the reasons I'm gonna, I started taking saffron, is because it came up here. And so you could see this, there's quite a few clinical trials. Right now we only put the ones that we also have a genetic predisposition for, but we're gonna soon put everything there, even if we don't have a genetic predisposition for it. Examples like that would be cancer. The models for cancer are not good, and also there's regulatory risk, but still whatever the clinical trials show, we're gonna like put whatever shows up. Like we don't have, so certain things we don't have genetic predisposition for, but it still could be good for those things. And so we're gonna put all the clinical trials that you're just quickly able to see, okay, what is whatever supplement good for, what are all the clinical trials. And then as time goes on, as I mentioned, it's going to be smarter and smarter. So testosterone is something that, I think it's very clear, like you see something like testosterone, you see thyroid hormones. It's not just higher the better or lower the better. You want it to be balanced, and you have to know where you are in that level. In terms of some of the other things I take, so I take a couple things for gut health. A lot of these things are what reduced my food sensitivities. And so, I'm still trying to figure out how to incorporate Boswellia. I really liked how it interacted with my gut. And you could see that, it helps with my predisposition for gut inflammation, which I did notice. That was really cool. But then, there was some muscle pain from it, which I have to re-experiment with and see. It has some nice, I put some mechanisms here as well, like TREGS, increases TREGS, Clotho, it's mTOR inhibitor, AMPK activator. And, so the question is, what do we want to focus on from here? Like, is there any... Because here, like, there's a lot of supplements that you could see here. Do we want to look at cognitive function, energy, mood?
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. I think one thing we should focus on, with this being Nootropics Depot and kind of our listener base, I think they're very interested in like mood enhancers, memory enhancers, focus enhancers, energy enhancers, things like that. So I'm sure they would love to hear what some of your favorites are, and specifically what some of your favorites are from our product catalog that you are taking.
Absolutely.
I know Cognance is one.
Right.
Bacosides, you were saying, was one.
Yeah, so in terms of mood, let's go with mood. To be honest, the B complex is like really important for me, just to keep that simple.
Agreed. We do the same.
Yeah. I need more serotonin, so I do add in a good amount of tryptophan. And that has to do with genetics and some lifestyle stuff, but essentially I need more serotonin, so tryptophan is critical for me, and I also take some extra 5-HTP. Lithium orotate, also for mood. And then in terms of other products for mood, I like the Cognance and then the Bacosides and the ashwagandhas, pretty good for mood. I tend to do better with MAO A and B inhibitors. So that's something like green tea extract I find improves my mood. One of the best things for me, I would say like this has been a serious game changer, is butyrate. And I take both pills, but you can't get enough from pills. So I take a resistant starch. I do sell it as well. But and the reason I sell is because the ones on the market are currently like potato starch. And I'm like, I don't want that potato starch. It causes, it used to cause inflammation, especially when I was sensitive to lectins and potatoes and whatnot. So it's either like bananas or green bananas, potatoes. This one is much cleaner, so it doesn't have those lectins, but it has a good bit of resistant starch. And I find that like this is I take that for butyrate. I think that's like critical for mood, food tolerances, cognitive function, wakefulness, energy. It really does like the whole spectrum of stuff. It's anti-cancer with the HDAC inhibition properties. There's only two things that activate a certain receptor for the anti-inflammatory effects from the gut, which you kind of need to create tolerance. Those are niacin and butyrate. So that's called the GPR109A receptor. And really there's only butyrate and niacin does that. So so that's for gut inflammation. And actually, it turns out that the butyrate also makes you more sensitive to thyroid hormones, so which is quite interesting. Yeah, it's something I recently discovered. So it makes you more sensitive. It's good for immunity, and there's really like it acts as a serotonergic in different ways as well. So really, it's like a perfect fit for me. It improves like the cannabinoid 1 receptor. Tyrosine hydroxylase. There's quite a lot of benefits. So I would say butyrate is one of them. But going, in terms of, let's see what else there is. That's pretty much that's the main thing for mood. We want to talk about cognitive function. I like pregnenolone. The Subroxy or Oxalin A is like really good. I find.
Agreed.
Yeah. Lion's mane, the one that.
What does pregnenolone do for you in terms of cognition? What do you notice, or what have you seen from your lab testing?
In my lab testing, I mainly noticed increases in estradiol. So, but that's just what shows up on the lab test. And again, this is what I notice. I haven't done that much beta testing with it. In this case, by the way, I was sick here, so it's a little. I wouldn't judge this, but you could see my my estradiol goes all over the map, and this really depends on what I'm taking. So sometimes I experimented with like inhibitors, and that's probably where this was, or it was basically different periods. You could see went from 22 to 49, and it shouldn't change that much. Like this really just depends on what I'm doing, or sometimes if you're sick as well, it could change that. As basically you're creating more cortisol, less is going to make estradiol. But pregnenolone, I did notice cognitive benefits too, and also I think the main thing is motivation. So just the motivation to work. I'm just, I would say for cognitive function, this is what I have here. I mean, verbal fluency, working memory, myelin, and increases estrogen. Also wakefulness, right? It definitely stimulates wakefulness. So, so that's kind of, that's pregnenolone. Oxalin A, I really like. I'm still trying to see like what dosage I want to take. I recently did a Megadose with 1 gram of it. But
wow, okay.
Daily.
What did you notice with that? Because I've noticed it changes quite a bit. That's what I was talking about earlier with that bell-shaped response curve. Lower doses for me are more stimulating, strangely enough, than higher doses. How was your experience?
It's hard to say because when you're taking lower doses, you just don't really feel as much of anything, to be honest. Like most of the days I'm taking 300 milligrams, I'm not really getting that. Like it's like, oh, I feel the Subroxy hitting,
Which for me, I do feel it at 100 milligrams quite clearly. So when we first got Subroxy, Sabinza, the manufacturer of it, was saying 100 milligrams is a good dose. We beta tested it. We were like, wow, this is actually quite stimulating. And then they came out with a new study and they said, hey, by the way, the dose is actually 500 milligrams now. And a lot of us were a little bit nervous to take 500 milligrams because to us that seemed like a really high dose based on how stimulating 100 milligrams was for most of us. So then when we bumped it up, I was really surprised that it was actually a little bit smoother and almost a little bit less stimulating, like definitely more focus enhancing, more motivation enhancing. But that almost like slightly edgy type of stimulation was smoothed off with higher doses compared to the lower dose.
Interesting. Yeah. For me, I did 2 megadoses with a gram, actually. And I find that I become more extroverted. Just, it gives me more of the dopamine effect.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that is necessarily the amount that I would take every day. I mean, no, you see here that what I'm taking is about 300 milligrams. That's kind of where I'm at right now. That's liable to change. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of where I'm at now because I'm kind of like, okay. Mm-hmm. I tend to take like a third of what I take at a megadose, right? And then I say, okay, 300 milligrams should be good here. That I would say, like, I've tried a lot of lion's manes. You guys have the best ones, so I'll go to that one.
That's good to hear. We've spent a lot of research and development efforts on lion's mane, as we talked about on your podcast. Yeah,
that I think you guys have a really good product there. So that's I bought the Arinacin A. Arinamax. Yeah. I bought the Arinamax, and I'm gonna see how that is. But I really like the lion's mane 8-to-1. I don't know if I notice. I don't know if I've seen any lab changes. Again, the reason why I'm doing more lab testing is because actually that's the area where I want to improve. At this point, I basically megadosed every supplement that I want to megadose on the market, right? I mean, there's always going to be new supplements and, I'll continue to do that. But there's already starting to be a little bit of diminishing returns on how much I'm able to know just by how I feel, right? And so I'm trying to supplement that with, like, the goal is to take a lab test every week. Will I be successful at that? Probably not. But, at least maybe like once every 2 weeks, once a month. And the idea is that the more lab data I can get, the more I could really start doing A/B testing with these things and trying to see how is this affecting my labs overall. And because right now, like, I will notice certain things. So certain things have popped up even with the lab testing that I'm doing. But because it's not frequent enough, like a lot of things are like, did this affect it or not? So I'm trying to get better at that.
And I think that's kind of the one limit these days still with like blood lab testing and genetic testing is that when it comes to cognitive function and a lot of these more esoteric mechanisms, like with lion's mane acting on nerve growth factor and what we just took, the tiger milk, is acting on nerve growth factor. How are you testing that in a current blood test? I don't know if you can really judge the amount of neuroplasticity that's going on, the amount of neurotransmitters that are in your brain. That's kind of,
right. So,
in my opinion, one of the drawbacks.
I wouldn't say that with the stuff that's purely cognitive, you're not going to notice. You shouldn't notice things with the blood, right? However, what I want to make sure is that if I'm taking lion's mane, I want to make sure that it's not doing something funky on, thyroid hormones. One thing I realize is like, so a lot of the studies with thyroid hormones is on animals, right? So they're not really doing tests on how each of these things affects thyroid hormones, affects testosterone, affects this, that. Like there's gaps, we shall say, right? When they're doing these studies on animals, they're doing it to see like whatever for a specific purpose. They're not checking everything to see what's going on. So I do feel like there's some gaps in terms of not understanding. So what we want to do is try to fill in as many of those gaps as possible because there's certain things that do have information. Like there is information on high dose niacin, like clinical trials, acetylcarnitine, glucomannan in reducing thyroid function. And then, for certain things we could, at the very least for the warnings, we could go based on animal studies to say, hey, this might be increasing or decreasing thyroid function. But
exactly,
like if I'm going to take lion's mane for the next, we have to think about this for like long term. Let's say I have another, 60 years on this planet. am I going to take lion's mane for 60 years and not know what the hell is going on with my lab test?
Yeah, you want to know what's going on. And I think, yeah, maybe at some point in the future, we'll be able to have tests for neuroplasticity and the density of norepinephrine receptors and dopamine receptors, or TRKA and TRKB receptors. I think a lot of that is kind of this mystery now, because a lot of people go, oh yeah, I don't have enough dopamine. I hear that all the time. And, that's more so coming from how am I feeling? Like, I'm feeling a little bit unfocused. And I know dopamine makes me more focused, or serotonin is good for mood. And we all kind of make these leaps a little bit sometimes, because we can't go into our brains and go, okay, yeah, there's clearly a deficiency in serotonin levels or dopamine levels. And we kind of go by feel. But like you're saying, especially with a lot of these botanicals, you might be taking lion's mane and it's affecting your thyroid hormones, and that's actually giving you the benefits, not the nerve growth factor. Or you're taking Subroxy and you think it's helping with dopamine, but it's actually having an effect on blood glucose levels or something like that, and that's having a positive effect. So I think that's where there's some gaps, and also where there's some interesting overlap between kind of our and your approach too, like we talked about in the podcast I was on with you, where there's a very human element to all of this too. Like, lab tests and genetic analysis is crucial for general overall health and optimizing things happening in your body. When it comes to the brain, it's a little bit more up to interpretation sometimes, not always. There are some genetic markers and lab tests that can help there, but you really have to be good at, how do I feel on this? So for example, with Erica, you love Subroxy, but if you take Subroxy for 3 weeks, you have negative effects.
Yeah.
And same thing with me. I actually really love tiger milk mushroom, but if I take it for a month straight, I start getting really irritable. And actually for me, higher doses, now I'm discovering on this podcast, live in action here, this 4-capsule dose of tiger milk mushroom has been my best experience with tiger milk mushroom so far, because I'm getting all of the verbal fluency, the focus, the mood boost. I'm actually getting quite a bit of color saturation, like things seem crisper, deeper in color. This is something both Paul and I, the owner of Nootropics Depot, have noticed with NGF enhancing supplements. But for me, it seems like a big dose of an NGF active supplement like Arenimax or tiger milk mushroom acutely every once in a while, very beneficial, but in the long term, not so much. And same with you with Subroxy. It works great every once in a while, but not long term. And I think if there was something that you could see on a lab test or on a genetic analysis that would tell you, hey, you can take Subroxy for 2 weeks and then you need to stop, that would be ideal. But for now, we kind of have to rely also on ourselves and some research.
Yeah, there's still some. I think with the brain stuff, you're right. There's not going to be any lab tests that you can do. But what you can do, and this is kind of what I would be doing that for, is making sure that you don't have negative effects on your lab tests. Like, hey, I started taking this.
And general overall health.
And general, right. And also just making sure that, or if you're like, so most people are going to take a lab test once, twice a year. Let's say once a year, right? Some people, a lot of people never take lab tests. I really think that I'm trying to really encourage people to take lab tests. But let's say once a year, that should be like, okay, you could then get a snapshot of, you kind of get, here's, you could figure out recommendations that you should do before the lab test. And then you could see, at the very least, is there anything that, you should try to get a baseline, but then you could start taking certain things or doing certain things and then see, are you moving in the right direction with the lab tests, right? Or are things going out of range here? And that could work if you're taking it once a year. So, I definitely think that, but it's more important for me to do more frequent ones because I'm taking so many, and this is kind of very on the edge frontier to take so many things and not knowing exactly how they're going to interact. So I also want to, that's why I take them more frequently. But I think for most people, twice a year can work, right? Especially if they're only going to be taking 10 or less supplements.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of goes back to what we discussed right at the beginning of this podcast. Even though we are megadosing things, Joe is megadosing things, it's not necessarily a smart idea for everyone to be doing that. And I'm saying that kind of I'm not taking blood tests, so I should be really careful. And part of the reason why my stack is a little bit on the smaller side is because I also don't necessarily want to overdo it. I think if you're taking 150 supplements, then it's absolutely crucial. I don't think there's any way around lab testing. Like, you need to be doing the lab testing. The interactions are complex. You need to see what's going on with your liver enzymes and things like that, and cardiovascular health, because every supplement you add on, there's another layer of complexity, and that can have an impact on your general health. But I do feel like for a lot of people I know, they just take a little bit of magnesium. I think a lot of people are deficient in magnesium. It's probably better to get that determined through a blood test, but I think something like 70% of individuals in the US at least are not hitting their recommended daily intake of magnesium. So it's a pretty safe bet that taking 100 or 200 milligrams of elemental magnesium is a good thing. Taking some B vitamins, a little bit of vitamin D3, keeping it simple, and then adding on top of a few nootropics here and there. But if you start getting really complex, like Joe, like the owner of Nootropics Depot, who also takes a huge stack, I think it's important
How much
to
does
get
he
your
take?
blood tested every once in a while. It fluctuates, not as much as you, but the thing with Paul is that a lot of the supplements he's taking is like really on the cutting edge. Like a lot of these novel products we've been coming out with recently, we have probably like 10 or 20 maybe even in the works right now that he's taking. And he's maybe one of the only people in the world who's taking some of these really cutting edge novel supplements. So it's like, it's a very large stack, and then constantly he's adding on new things because he's very interested in what does this new extract of this supercritical extract of Boswellia do, or what does this new Tongkat Ali extract do. And so there's constantly things being added on.
Does he do a lot of lab testing?
That actually I'm not so sure. I'll have to ask him because we've never really had a conversation about that. But I'd be curious to see how his lab tests change as well. But I think it's important to have some level of control there too. And I see it oftentimes, even with myself and with Paul, when we start introducing a lot of new things to our stack. We might go, my joints are starting to hurt. Or like you said, my muscles are starting to hurt. What's causing that? So if you're just throwing the whole kitchen sink at it, 100%. Like it could be an interaction, it could just be one thing. So you need to be really in tune with your body, your mind, and lab tests and genetic analysis and things like that to make sure that, you're exploring this uncharted territory. There's not a lot of people who are even taking 5 supplements.
No, and there's also something to be said for people's concern about the safety of taking supplements or so many supplements or certain combinations. And I think it's totally justified because if you don't have scientific background or a background in healthcare or genetics, without really direct feedback, what it's doing to your body, how do you know if it's going to help you in the long term? And we talk about the importance of lab testing botanicals or ingredients to make sure that they're standardized properly. Just for supplements, for what Nootropics Depot does. And that's it's the most important thing that Nootropics Depot does to make sure that the supplements that we create are safe.
And I think a very important thing actually to mention there is if you are taking like 2 or 3 supplements and they have slightly higher than like kind of at the edge of, let's say, Proposition 65, the California heavy metal regulations, if you're taking 2 supplements that are at half the limit of the Prop 65 regulation, then you add those 2 on top of each other, and now you're at the Prop 65 limit already. Now, if you take 4 of those supplements, now you're twice above the limit already. So when we look at different supplements throughout the supplement industry, sometimes we see pretty high heavy metal amounts too. So if you're taking a much larger stack with higher dosages of things, you could actually be intaking a decent amount of heavy metals. And we actually go to manufacturers, and we're really annoying about this because we want everything to be well below Prop 65 standards. And even with patented manufacturers like Shodan or something like that, or Prima V Shilajit is an example, their levels are a little bit too high for our comfort normally. So we actually request special batches to be made just for us. So they go and analyze and they see which batches test the lowest. Yeah, so we
seriously?
actually are.
What was Prima V Shilajit high?
Like, it's not too high. It's still within the USP regulations. But if you do it with the Prop 65, which, to be honest, Prop 65
is extremely strict.
It's extremely strict. It's too strict, in my opinion. Like, they set very unrealistic targets, but because we want to be able to stay underneath those targets, we sometimes have to get special batches made. So I'm not saying that a normal batch of Prima V Shilajit is too high in those heavy metals. Like, it was still perfectly within spec, but at the dosages we were setting, we wanted slightly lower levels, so we get special batches made for us. And also, going to our suppliers abroad or even in the US, we are always huge sticklers about it. And sometimes it takes a really long time for us to also release products, or sometimes we'll run out of stock on a product and we'll get it in, and it's just a little bit too high for our comfort on a little bit of lead or arsenic, something that's still totally acceptable, but not at our standards, not at the Prop 65 standards. And part of the reason too is we're taking a lot of these supplements. So if you're taking something that's right at the limit, it's good, but it's just one supplement. Now you take multiple different supplements, 150 supplements, 150 times that amount of lead could be a bad amount of lead. So
or if you're megadosing supplements, that's another thing to be aware of as well. And so the levels that we test for, that we make sure, that the supplements are under, it allows for more flexibility with your dosing as well, because it allows you to have that peace of mind knowing that it's safe and that you're not going to be risking heavy metals or all the different things that could happen.
And we've definitely rejected some batches of stuff where you're like, holy shit, that's a lot of heavy metals. Like, throw that in the trash right away. Like, we're destroying it, because we don't even want to send it back. Because sometimes if we send a supplement back to the manufacturer, it will just go to the next company that doesn't test. So there's definitely supplements on the market that have way higher levels of heavy metals than they should be. For example, we've been having some issues with kava. Like, we want to bring out a kava product, but one of the reasons we haven't brought out a kava product is because most kava on the market has too high of a heavy metal spec in order to be compliant with Prop 65 if you up the doses. So like, traditional kava doses are right around 40 grams. If you take a gram of that powder, you're fine, but you multiply it by 40, now you're at or above the limits. So we see that sometimes. And actually, recently we were developing a sweetener blend for a supplement, and we used allulose. So we wanted to use allulose to get like a little bit of the texture of sugar, but not the calories of sugar. And we thought about using 5 grams. Well, it turns out from this supplier, the allulose, we could use 1 gram, and then we were at the Prop 65 limit, or 1.5 grams, and then we were at the Prop 65. So if we went to 5 grams, in addition to all of the other ingredients, we would have been way over the Prop 65. So even something as simple as a sweetener, as a flavoring agent, those can all be sources of heavy metals. And as a standalone product, not an issue. When you add it all up together, then it can be a compounding issue. And then it's also important to get your heavy metal levels tested through a blood test. And to buy from reputable companies.
For the last thing, 100% agree with everything there. You guys are great with that stuff. For the last section, I think I'll just go through some of the supplements that I've taken from you guys and that I really like. So this is, just some of the ones that we haven't mentioned yet. So one of them I think is the tyrosol and seleucide. So seleucide actually stimulates thyroid hormones in animals, and it's good for mitochondria. I actually did notice some kind of, again, it's sometimes a little hard to say, but I would, it's overall I noticed a good effect from the seleucide, and I don't know of any other company that sells pure seleucide or seleucide and tyrosol. So I like you guys for that. Like, I'm saying besides you guys, of course, right? Yeah, any other companies. That's one of the ones I take, and right now it's under thyroid, but it could be under a bunch of other things technically. But overall, I like that for mood. So if I'm going out and I want to be a little more extroverted, I think the seleucide, the Cognance, and the Subroxy would be my stack. And then going down, let's see, for energy function, you guys have the best
that's my. I'm really confident with it.
Eleutherol. I don't know how to say it, but you guys have the best.
So when I
Which
was
one
on
is
your
it?
podcast, I know you said it eleuthero, and then I went eleuthero because that's how we've been saying it. But then I was looking at the word after we did the podcast, and I was like, no, it is eleuthero. You were definitely correct.
Oh, see, okay, so I've been messing it up now. I've been saying it before, good. We got into a whole debate on the other podcast.
Materials.
But I don't know, it just seems weird.
It's a weird name,
Eleuthero,
yeah.
I don't know. So I don't know how to say. I don't think anybody really knows. But in any case, Eleuthero, you guys have the best one on the market there. Yeah, I've tried a couple different brands. You guys have the best one. That's mainly for energy, cognitive, certain other things. But essentially, energy and cognitive is the main. I think it has also some immunity-enhancing effects. And then, so that for energy, I would say that's. I've been trying out your NMN. I had to take a gram to notice anything from NMN. I don't know if yours. I don't know if yours is necessarily better, but is it like you guys? Oh, your amoxapine is great.
Unfortunately,
I love that.
We can't find a supplier for that.
I find that I get energy from that.
So with some of these things, sometimes like
you're stopping to sell it.
We're still looking for a supplier of it, but sometimes this happens. So we have a relationship with a supplier abroad, usually in China. They have a lab. They're making amoxapine succinate, and we're basically one of the only companies that's buying it. And then that company goes out of business, or they lose kind of one of their chemists that can make it, and then the source dries up. And because they're basically the only people on the planet that are making amoxapine succinate, we can't get it. So now we're in this phase of looking for a new supplier.
Do you still have it in stock?
I think we're just fully through our stock. We had quite a bit, and we sold through that stock, and yeah, now we're dry. I think it's not in stock. But yeah, that's a really cool product. I really like that.
Oh man, I'm disappointed. Yeah, no, I thought that was good for energy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you guys are out of stock. I was gonna try to buy as much stock as I can, but okay, so that one is really good. Do you think your NMN is better than the other NMN? Like you have one that's doesn't get broken down the small intestine, you said. I don't. You think that's better, like better absorbed?
So I think just our regular old NMN, there's nothing special about it except for the fact that it is one real NMN and two, it is pure NMN. Maybe the same cannot be said for all of the NMN that's out there. I'm not totally sure. I don't think we've ever done any testing of other people's NMN. We do have the enteric-coated tablets.
Okay. Yeah, that was the one I was
one of
talking about, the
enteric-coated.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of a debate about this. There's some debate actually even in scientific articles, but there does seem, according to some researchers, there seems to be a specific transporter for NMN in the intestines. I think the SLC128A or something along those lines. And that's kind of been debated, whether that transporter exists or doesn't exist. The research we were going by at the time, there was no rebuttal against it. So we thought, okay, cool, there's this transporter in the intestines. NMN doesn't necessarily break down rapidly in stomach acid, but it would probably be better to avoid stomach acid contact so that we can get everything into the intestines intact. And then there's that specific transporter there, and then we can get better uptake of NMN because it's releasing in the intestines. So we never did any pharmacokinetic studies on this. That's super expensive, but we just kind of had this thought based on a study we read. We made some of these enteric-coated tablets. We tried them. We realized they felt more energizing, whatever that means. Does that mean it's absorbing more? Does it mean it's absorbing quicker? It's hitting higher peak levels? I'm not totally sure. But a lot of our customers also comment, and people on Reddit, that the enteric-coated NMN is the only NMN they personally feel. For me, I don't necessarily notice much from the enteric-coated NMN. I do notice quite a bit of effects from the 1,000 milligram dose of regular NMN or NADH, and specifically I really like the OptiNAD+. Like I actually get some noticeable effects from that. And I think it's due to the NADH, because the NADH is just...
I should mention that I take your NADH and I like that as well for energy. So that's a good one.
Nice.
I take
that's a cool one. That was one we were surprised by.
Yeah, I mean, I took some other NADHs in the past, some of the sublinguals. They didn't really help, or I didn't notice anything too significant.
I think it's too big of a compound to be absorbed sublingually, and this is something we're up against oftentimes too. Like, do we do something sublingually, yes or no? But a compound needs to be of a certain molecular weight to be able to go through the sublingual membrane. It has to have a particular type of partition coefficient, so it can easily jump between water and fat solubility, so that's really important. And then the dose needs to be fairly low. So something like NADH, the dose is low enough where it could potentially work, but the molecule is so big that it likely is not going to be absorbing very well. On the flip side, there does seem to be specific NADH transporters throughout the body, just not in the sublingual membrane. So if you take it orally, it does work, even though technically it shouldn't really work because it's a big compound. And if you look at just NAD+, that doesn't seem to be absorbing very readily. Doesn't seem to be very stable either. So NADH is a cool option because, one, it does seem to absorb. It generates quite a bit of ATP once it does get absorbed, because it gets absorbed straight into mitochondria, it seems to, where it's having an effect on the electron transport chain. And when it's in the electron transport chain, it loses that hydrogen and then it becomes NAD+. So it's a pretty quick switch. But again, there's not a whole lot of human clinical trials data or anything like that. But if we're going by purely subjective effects, that's the NAD+ supplement that I noticed the most.
Same here.
And actually, when we were making Opti NAD+, and when we were making Opti NAD+, we didn't have NADH in there at first, and it felt like NMN. And I kind of felt like maybe I even want a little bit of a higher dose to get that energy effect. It felt more pronounced than just NMN or nicotinamide riboside on its own. But then we got some NADH in, we added in 10 milligrams, and that's when the whole stack clicked into place. Like, it felt just whatever. Without the NADH, we put the NADH in, and it went to a whole new level. And even with half the dose that's in the normal NADH product. So the NADH in chlorella, it's 20 milligrams. In Opti NAD+, it's 10 milligrams. But together with all of that other stuff in Opti NAD+, like, it's a very interesting effect. But NADH is
nice. Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. Definitely feel an effect from it. I'm not going to go into this too much. I like chocomine, whatever. It's like a cocoa extract. You guys sell it.
I think that's super
underrated.
It's
I don't, you don't really see it spoken about much, but it's got good effects. Definitely has good effects. I take that for cognitive function, probably also cardiovascular support, but mainly for cognitive function. Then what else in terms of there's some things I have under kidney health, but really, like, you guys have a unique astragalus. Nobody else has this on the market. I really like that. Just so I don't do very well with the whole astragaluses on the market because I find them too immunostimulatory in certain ways. So, yeah, and so it turns out that the astragaloside 4 is less immunostimulatory. Like, it activates these T regulatory cells more and less just like wholesale stimulating the immune system. So for me, I'm already like a little too, kind of more predisposed to autoimmunity. I feel like it's too immunostimulatory for me, the whole thing. So I find this astragaloside 4 very good. I get energy, notice good effects from it. It did improve a lab marker. I don't know if it was this or some of the other things. I'm not 100% sure, but my cystatin C went down, which is a measure of kidney function.
Nice.
So that's good. I don't know exactly what it was from, though, just to be honest, but I think it was probably one of these supplements. And then the cordyceps I like, also get energy from it. Also just astragalus and
that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, they're very good for kidney functions. That's why it's under kidney function. But in general, like, it's also good for cognition, energy, mood. So I kind of like. You guys also have a very good cordyceps. Probably, yeah, I think definitely the best one I've tried. So that's why I'm kind of focusing on these, because there's certain other things like uridine. Like, it doesn't really matter who makes it. If it's uridine monophosphate, it's going to be the same thing as long as it's good quality, like you say. So, I'm going to be more price sensitive to those things if you have two companies that have good quality control, let's say. But for things like the astragalus and the cordyceps, those I would say like it's just almost like a different compound that you're getting from other companies just because of how you extract it. The cordyceps is
and how we cultivate it too. Like the mushrooms is definitely a cultivation thing. So there's definitely been this kind of rhetoric that you can't get mushrooms from China because they're polluted with heavy metals. Well, guess what? You need to test for the heavy metals to actually make sure that's the case. And we test for the heavy metals, and the lowest heavy metal amounts that we can get are from farmers that we work with directly in China. So the one thing that China has that the Western world doesn't have, mushrooms are really new in the Western world. Like the Western world generally has been kind of like fungi phobic. We don't like mushrooms. We don't want to eat them. Like a lot of people don't like mushrooms in general. But in the last 10, 20 years with people like Paul Stamets, there's definitely been a push towards people enjoying mushrooms. There's like this mystical element around it, which people like. And now you have a lot of Western companies attempting to grow decent mushrooms. And I think a lot of them are failing. But in China and Japan and Malaysia, so for example, this tiger milk, we're getting it grown in Malaysia by people who have spent many years taking tiger milk mushroom that they cultivated or they found in the wild, and then they figured out cultivation methods, and for the first time ever, this is now cultivated tiger milk mushroom. And in China too, they just have the setups, they have the knowledge, hundreds of years of knowledge of mushroom cultivation that then results in very good products. But you have to work with the right farms. And over like the last 8 to 10 years, we've just established relationships with mushroom farmers and extractors that are associated with those mushroom farmers. And I think that really pays off in the end because we're getting super high quality cultivated mushrooms, and then we're extracting the already good stuff that's there from those mushrooms. And I think a lot of the times, especially in the US or in the Western world, you're getting these mushrooms that are being grown basically mycelium on grain. Maybe there's a little bit of fruiting body. There's this new trick going on now where they're kind of cultivating on mycelium, like mycelium on grain, and then they're letting it fruit a little bit, and then they're taking the fruit and the mycelium on grain and grinding it all up. I know a few companies are doing that now. I think it can be interesting, but on the other hand, you have a lot of grains in there and fillers, and you're not getting pure fruiting body, which we are. And it's expensive and an arduous task to make sure it's fruiting body and all of that. But it's really good to hear that all of this like very nitpicky work and making sure these relationships exist and all of the testing that it's
absolutely working. No, I can tell the difference.
You mentioned it. It's like a completely
different
thing.
If I didn't like, I mean, you could talk all about like how good the quality is, and if I can't feel the difference, I don't care. Like I actually do feel a difference.
Exactly, and that's our thing too.
So the just some other things I take black seed mainly for the research, not necessarily for like how I feel great on it or whatever, right? I do feel something, but it's nothing like spectacular. But I just like that you guys have the 10% thymoquinone. So you're standardizing for that, which is, I think, the highest I've seen on the market. By the way,
I think it is the highest. I think there's another company that's claiming 20% now. I'm not sure if that's a real value. 10% definitely is very high. An interesting thing to note there, for me, the 5% feels nice. If I take the 10%, it's like a sedative. I get super tired. I basically have
I take it at night.
So for me, it doesn't work. And it's really strange.
Yeah. So anything that makes me a little tired, I just take it at night.
That one's pretty strong. Yeah.
Like, a little tired, take it at night.
Makes sense. Yeah.
In the night stack it goes. So what else? Yeah, and then like I think that's pretty much. I take a few other stuff from you guys. Like I take the reishi. I'm still trying to figure out which one I like better: the 9% ganoderic acids or the the 8-to-1 or whatever. I'm still not sure. I don't like that it doesn't have enough clinical trials. Just reishi in general, and then also I don't know if I feel.
Which is strange because it's one of the most.
Right, I know. That's what's weird, right? Like you would assume there's certain things that you would assume don't have a lot of clinical trials and do, and then certain things that you would assume do and don't, right? So, reishi is one of those things that does not like you just can't find a lot of clinical trials on it, and so that's kind of like something that I'm trying to figure out longer term. what I want to do with that. But that's pretty much. I like your Shazandra as well. That's you guys have a good Shazandra. Still have to figure out like
nice one.
how I want it. It's in my regimen, but I still have to figure out like where it fits in with the 150. You know.
Have you tried Panamax? So Panamax is the Panax ginseng leaf, the Panax ginseng root, and then Shazandra, all three together. That's one of my favorite.
We were taking it a long time in our daily stuff.
So it's a combination
and
one.
We kind of made it because I really.
I try to stay away from.
Stack.
Is it a Natrium Health one?
I try to stay away from combinations just because, like, I could read something one day and then decide to take one thing out, and then I have to take all three out. Not that that's relevant for other people, but for somebody like me, like I want to, you know, if I, like, for example, recently I said, okay, there's a few things that inhibit thyroid function. If I had those things in mixes, and like I had like one product that I got with a mix with acetyl L-carnitine, now I can't use it. And I only got it because I wanted a certain ingredient that I couldn't get elsewhere. But it was just like, now it's like, okay, I can't use it because it has the acetyl-carnitine. I'm trying to improve my thyroid function. So for me, I kind of like just like with this going with the single ingredients, unless I've really been taking something for a really long time, like all the individual ingredients. I'm like very confident that I want to continue taking that. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
That's quite a list. So for anyone who is wanting to look at this list in a more condensed form, I will be putting in podcast chapters for this whole episode, and I'll also link the products that Joe has talked about and that we've been talking about, because there's a lot to go back through. But it's been really interesting and inspiring to talk with you about blood tests, because Emil and I have these conversations every single month on the podcast talking about what we feel in the moment from our supplements. But I always wonder, you know, at a certain point, once we've taken so many different things, do we repeat ourselves just because we don't have more creative language? Are we feeling the same thing? What are the effects actually going to be long term? And there is an answer to that, and the answer is to be able to look at testing. So it's really cool to talk with you about it, because I think that having this commitment to testing on the supplement side and the commitment to testing on the human side is really important, and they go hand in hand, and it just makes sense that you would do both, because both are going to help you ensure that you're doing what you hope for your health, and that you can actually get the good parts out of the supplements that you want, the benefits, and, you know, everything that we hope for with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And then just as parting words, I should say that the two kinds of testing people really have to understand. The genetic testing could be good at saying, hey, maybe you should take this, right? Because here's all the benefits, here's your predispositions. Maybe if you input labs and fill out some questionnaires, we'll make that better, of course. But it's basically a first point of like, hey, you should, you know, these are things that you should try first, right? And then once you take it, you could say, okay, how do I feel from it? Which is always going to be important, because no matter what any genetic test is going to tell you or anything, if you don't feel good from something, just stop, right? There's a gap in information that we have. And then the next stage is to say, okay, I've been taking this for some time. Let me see, how are my lab tests changing from it? Are they getting better? Or are they getting worse? And that's my overall approach. And I definitely, that's kind of what I'm preaching, if you will, like how other people should do it. And they don't have to be as hardcore as me. The whole idea of me working on the software, you know, building this product, is so that people don't have to have like 200-page documents looking at all these different kinds of things. So that's automatically done. All that stuff is automatically done for you. And then you can just upload your lab test and then see how it's interacting for you. And even, by the way, we have a feature that's pretty cool that's also going through some upgrades, that you could see what a lot of people are like, hey, what lab test do I take? So we actually recommend lab tests. We just released the initial version that we released is, to be honest, not amazing, but it's like an MVP. But it is pretty good. But the next version is going to be pretty great. So those are some cool features that I would definitely recommend as well. But yeah, it's been great talking to you guys.
Nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of your data with us and telling us what you've been taking. And for anyone who's curious, definitely check out SelfDecode and check out Joe's podcast, The Joe Cohen Show, as well. There's a lot of really interesting conversations that you're having on your podcast too. And as always, thank you for listening to In Search of Insight. We're so happy to be able to talk with you and share this information with you every single month. And we will see you next month for another exciting guest podcast as well. So with that, we will say goodbye for now. See ya.
See ya.